We are live now.
السلام عليكم.
السلام عليكم معاليك.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
ننتظر بس دقيقة لحد ما يدخلون البارتيسيبنت.
Okay. Good morning everybody.
السلام عليكم.
عليكم السلام. ما عرفت الترجمة لا؟
نعم موجود ترجمة معاليك.
Okay.
My mic is working.
أعتقد بنبدأ الحين معاليك. ماهر راح نبدأ بإذن الله.
نعم تفضلي.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين محمد بن عبد الله وآله وبيته وصحبه أجمعين. معالي حسين الحمادي وزير التربية والتعليم، السادة الخبراء المحاضرين، الأخوة والأخوات الحضور والمشاركين، نتشرف بوجودكم في هذا اليوم المبارك الذي نلتقي فيه لنتحاور ونتبادل الخبرات حول المكون الأهم في حياتنا ومستقبل بلادنا ورفاهنا، ألا وهو أبنائنا، وحول أهم محاور تطوير التعليم، وهو الطفولة المبكرة، والتي تعتبر من أهم مراحل البناء النفسي والاجتماعي للإنسان، حيث أن السنوات المبكرة من عمر الطفل هي سنوات نمو من الناحية الاجتماعية والنفسية والعقلية واللغوية، حيث أثبتت الدراسات المختلفة بأن 80% من دماغ الطفل يكتمل عند بلوغ 3 سنوات، و75% من كل وجبة يأكلها الطفل تذهب إلى بناء دماغه، وكل 15 دقيقة من اللعب تصنع آلاف الوصلات الدماغية في دماغ الطفل. لذا يجب استغلال هذه المرحلة استغلالاً إيجابياً بما يكفل النمو السوي من كافة الجوانب. لذا يجب وفي هذه المرحلة تظهر لدى الطفل الكثير من القدرات الإبداعية والابتكارية التي ينبغي الاهتمام بها وتنميتها ومن هذا المنطلق تم اختيار رعاية الطفولة المبكرة والتعليم أفضل الممارسات والتوجهات المستقبلية ليكون موضوعاً لهذه الندوة التربوية. الأخوة والأخوات الأفاضل، إن الندوات التربوية التي يقيمها المركز الإقليمي للتخطيط التربوي تمثل نشاطاً حيوياً ضمن الأهداف الاستراتيجية التي يسعى المركز لتحقيقها من أجل نشر المعرفة المتعلقة بالتخطيط التربوي وتيسير الانتفاع بها، وهي تمثل عملاً مؤسسياً نحرص عليه ونحسن الإعداد له من خلال دعوة المختصين والمفكرين والتربويين لتبادل الأفكار وإجراء الحوارات التربوية للخروج برؤى وتوصيات من شأنها تطوير منظومة التعليم وتحسين مخرجاته والإعداد لمواجهة المشكلات والتحديات في هذا القرن. الأخوة والأخوات الأفاضل، يعيش العالم اليوم تطوراً متسارعاً في تكنولوجيا المعلومات والاتصالات، والذي ينعكس ظلاله على حياتنا وسلوكياتنا وأنظمتنا التعليمية، وأيضاً تأثيرات جائحة كوفيد-19 على الأنظمة التعليمية ألزمتها بتبني ممارسات مختلفة تجعلها أكثر تكيفاً مع المتغيرات التي تحيط بها وتؤثر في قطاعاتها المختلفة، ومن أهمها قطاع الطفولة المبكرة. إن هذه الندوة تهدف إلى صنع الوعي حول أهمية رعاية الطفولة المبكرة والتعليم على الصعيد الوطني والإقليمي والعالمي، وصولاً لتكوين فهم مشترك بالتعاون مع صناع السياسات وأصحاب الخبرات العملية عن التحديات والفرص المتاحة في مجال رعاية الطفولة المبكرة والتعليم، واكتساب معرفة عميقة عن التشريعات والسياسات التعليمية والمبادرات التي حصدت نجاحاً في هذا المجال عالمياً من خلال المنظمات الدولية المشاركة مثل منظمة اليونسكو واليونيسيف والبنك الدولي، ووطنياً ممثلة بهيئة أبو ظبي لرعاية الطفولة المبكرة، وكذلك تحقيق الانسجام المتعلق بالهدف الرابع، وخاصة الهدف الرابع 4.2 من أجندة الأمم المتحدة للتنمية المستدامة وجميع مكوناتها وأهدافها التعليم في 2030. ونحن نتطلع للاستماع إلى الخبراء المشاركين في هذه الندوة، كما نتطلع أيضاً إلى المناقشات والمداخلات الهادفة للوصول إلى رؤية ومساراً واضحاً لكيفية بناء نظام رعاية وتعليم للطفولة المبكرة يضمن إعداد جيل من المبدعين الذين يمتلكون مهارات وكفاءات عالية تمكنهم من الإسهام في دفع عجلة التنمية الشاملة والمستدامة والتعايش مع متطلبات القرن ال21. وتشرف الختام بأن أوجه الشكر لمعالي حسين الحمادي وزير التربية والتعليم ورئيس مجلس إدارة المركز الإقليمي للتخطيط التربوي للجهود التي يقوم بها في دعم مسيرة المركز وتفعيل دوره وتعزيز مشاركاته وتقدير جهوده في مجال التربية والتعليم، وأدعو معاليه لإلقاء الكلمة الافتتاحية لهذه الندوة، فليتفضل مشكورا. تفضل معاليك.
سبيكر كان اوف. في البدايه السلام عليكم ورحمه الله تعالى وبركاته. اتشرف اني اكون معاكم اليوم، واشكر الاخت ماهره على هذا العمل الجبار الكبير، وهذه ندوه مهمه جت في وقت مناسب نستفيد نحن في الامارات وفي الخليج ان شاء الله. فاصحاب المعالي والسعاده التربويين الافاضل، الاخوه والاخوات، الحضور الكريم، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته، وأسعد الله أوقاتكم في هذا اليوم الجميل. إخواني، في كل خطة أو توجه أو رؤية تربوية لابد أن يكون في تصميم لها إطار عام وفق منهجية تراعي الاحتياجات لجميع المراحل التعليمية لضمان الفعالية في الأداء والتطبيق، ومن ثم تحقيق الجودة والنواتج التعليمية المطلوبة من هذه المرحلة. ونحن اليوم محظوظين نتكلم عن مرحلة مهمة وحساسة جدا، وهي مرحلة الطفولة المبكرة التي تعد من أهم المراحل اللي يجب علينا نحن نهتم فيها ونقدم لها الدعم والرعاية. هي المرحلة التي يبدأ فيها تكوين الطفل مهاريا، اجتماعيا، سلوكيا ونفسيا، وهي الأساس. الناس تتكلم عن التعلم مدى الحياة، هي الأساس. إذا قدرنا نخلص هذه الأمور فيها فنحن ضمننا مفهوم التعلم مدى الحياة لدى الجيل القادم إن شاء الله. وهذه ندوة رعاية الطفولة المبكرة والتعليم، وعنوانها المميز أفضل الممارسات والتوجهات المستقبلية، يبين أهمية هذا الملف في تعزيز مفهوم التعلم مدى الحياة، وهذا هو الملف الحساس واللي يتكلم عنه جميع دول العالم. وكذلك الاستثمار المستقبلي الأمثل في البرامج الموجهة لهذه الفئة تحديداً. يعني ما هو أفضل من هذا الاستثمار؟ أنك تستثمر في هذا المرحلة المهمة. ناحية علمية، يعني مش ساينتست، بس أنا حسب قراءاتي أن الإنسان عندما ينولد يمتلك ما بين 80 إلى 100 مليار نيرون، يعني هي خلية عصبية، وهي هذه تحدد هويته وشخصيته والأنماط والفكر وما يدور في عقله. فنحن إذا قدرنا أن نستثمر هذه الحقيقة العلمية، والدراسات تؤكد أن هذه الخلايا اللي عددها بالمئات المليارات تتناقص تدريجيا مع مرور الزمن في حالة عدم الاستخدام. فالتعليم في مرحلة الطفولة المبكرة هو أفضل استثمار ممكن نقوم فيه. يعني حتى كوزارة التربية والتعليم نرى أن وضع المبالغ المالية في هذه المرحلة لها عائد استثماري أعلى من أي مرحلة. كونه أول شيء يساهم في تحقيق نطاق كبير في التشابك بين هذه الخلايا العصبية. كل ما تشابك هذه الخلايا بيكون عنده قدرية عقلية أكبر في بداية طفولته المبكرة، وهذه القدرة الجبارة من القدرة العقلية ممكن يستعملها في مراحل عمرية متقدمة في المستقبل. كذلك أن شخصية الفرد تتكون من 3 جوانب: حسب علم النفس التربوي، وهو الجانب العقلي المعرفي، الجانب الوجداني الانفعالي، والجانب الجسمي الحركي. ومنظومة التعليم في أي دولة تستهدف كل هذه الجوانب للشخص، وكذلك التوازن بين تنمية هذه الجوانب في الطفولة المبكرة بيعطي أفضل لصحة بناء الجسم. ونحن في الخليج وفي الإمارات يعني عندنا، نكون صريحين، عندنا شوي مع تحدي في هذه المرحلة لأن ما استثمرنا فيه كثير، ولكن ولله الحمد حسب التوجهات الجديدة الاستثمار فيه كبير إن شاء الله، وبيكون عائد علينا ممتاز إن شاء الله. وملف تعليم الطفولة المبكرة فيه اهتمام كبير من القيادة الرشيدة، وفي متابعة حثيثة لهذا الملف، وهو صراحة يسهل المعرفة، ينمي المهارات العقلية لدى الطفل عبر تحسين قدراته اللغوية، المعلومات المنوعة، تحفيز قدرات الابتكار. يعني حتى الأطفال الصغار ممكن ننمي قدرة الابتكار لهم عن طريق ألعاب بسيطة سهلة جدا، والاستثمار في السعة المعرفية وأنماط التفكير كذلك. ممكن نبني منظومة فكرية لإنتاج إنسان مشارك وفعال مجتمعيا وهو بهذا العمر صراحة. فبذلك نحن ننتج جيل جديد قادر على البناء والازدهار والنمو، بدل ما يكون له أثر سلبي أو هدام في المستقبل، لأن هذه هي المرحلة المهمة صراحة. كمان هي المرحلة اللي تنبني فيها القيم الإنسانية لدى الطفل. يعني الطفل في عمره الصغير هذا تمكنه من التسامح ومعرفة الذات وقبول الآخر، ويعد التعليم المبكر فرصة ذهبية لاكتشاف المشكلات لدى الطفل المستهدف، وبالتالي ممكن العلاج المبكر لهذه المشاكل وعدم كبرها. فنحن نقدر نستفيد ونستثمر صح، بس كذلك العائد الاستثمار ممكن يكون 10 أو 100 ضعف من استثمارنا. فالأخوة والأخوات، إدراكاً لكل اللي ذكرته قبل، دولة الإمارات حرصت بتوجهات القيادة الرشيدة على الاهتمام بالطفولة المبكرة، ووضعت الاستراتيجيات للسنوات ال50 القادمة في قطاع التعليم. والطفولة المبكرة تستحوذ على نصيب الأسد ونصيب كبير في التصورات والمرئيات المستقبلية، وفي ثمة جهود واضحة لتحقيق الهدف الرابع من أهداف التنمية المستدامة، وخاصة ما يرتبط بهذه المرحلة. كذلك قامت دولة الإمارات بسن العديد من التشريعات والسياسات واللوائح حول الأسرة والطفل، مثال السياسة الوطنية للأسرة وقانون حماية الطفل، وأنشأت العديد من المؤسسات الحكومية التي توفر الخدمات الأسرية والاجتماعية والصحية والاقتصادية الداعمة للأسرة والطفل. إذا تكلمنا عن بوصلة التعليم والتوجه المستقبلي في دولة الإمارات، نحن نركز 100% على التنمية المستدامة للرأس المال البشري والقوى العاملة في مرحلة الطفولة المبكرة، ونستثمر كذلك أفضل في التكنولوجيا والذكاء الاصطناعي لإدارة المعرفة والبيانات بفعالية للوصول إلى أفضل حكومة رقمية إن شاء الله في مرحلة الطفولة المبكرة، وتحقيق نظام تعليم مبكر ذو جودة عالية يضمن لنا التنافسية في مرحلة الطفولة المبكرة. كل هذا هدف الأساسي هو أن نتمكن من تحقيق مفهوم التعلم مدى الحياة وتأسيس رؤية تربوية مستدامة تركز على إعداد المسبق وتهيئة الظروف التعلم حتى من قبل الولادة إن شاء الله. وأنا سعيد وأشكركم على تواجدكم في هذا اللقاء اليوم، وهو لقاء افتراضي بسبب الظروف الراهنة، بس هذا يبين أهمية هذه المرحلة ويبين جميع المتطلبات اللي نحتاج نكون فيها، والوقت والتفكير والتشارك في الآراء. وهذه الندوة إن شاء الله سوف تعزز العمل المشترك وتبادل الأفكار والرؤى على المستوى الخليجي إن شاء الله والإقليمي كذلك، وإن شاء الله نستطيع معا نلبي المتطلبات المستقبلية ونتغلب على التحديات اللي تواجهنا جميعا في هذه المرحلة. والشكر للجميع، وانتظر بفارغ الصبر نتائج هذه الندوة، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته.
شكرا معاليك على هذه الكلمة التي أعطتنا صورة واضحة عن توجه القيادة في دولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة بالاهتمام بهذه المرحلة من مراحل التعليم، والتي إذا اهتمينا فيها سوف يعود بذلك بكثير من الاستثمار على الوطن وعلى الدولة بإذن الله. سوف نبدأ الآن فعاليات الجلسة الأولى. هذه الندوة طبعا تتكون من جلستين، كل جلسة فيها 3 أوراق. نبدأ الآن فعاليات الجلسة الأولى، وأرجو أن تعرف المشاركين أن هناك ترجمة يستطيعون أن يستمعون للغة العربية من خلال الترجمة واستخدام مايك الترجمة. وكذلك هناك العديد من الأسئلة عن الشهادات، سوف تكون هناك شهادات لهذه الندوة وسوف تصل للمشاركين عن طريق الإيميل بإذن الله. نبدأ الآن الجلسة الأولى. الجلسة الأولى تتكون من 3 أوراق يقدم لنا فيها البروفيسور ماتياس أوريان ورقة عن الطفولة المبكرة في أوقات عدم الاستقرار العالمي وبناء أنظمة الطفولة المبكرة المتكاملة والمرنة والمستدامة للأطفال والأسر والصالح العام. كذلك يقدم لنا البروفيسور إدوارد ورقة عن التأثير الطويل المدى لرعاية الطفولة المبكرة والتعليم من الناحية الأكاديمية والاجتماعية والاقتصادية. وتقدم لنا الأستاذة لويس من اليونيسيف حول ما هي الإجراءات التي يمكن من البنك الدولي، ما هي الإجراءات التي يمكن القيام بها لإدارة تأثيرات كوفيد-19 على التعلم ورفاهية الأطفال. فلنبدأ الآن الجلسة. بروفيسور ماتيوس, you can start now.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody, from a rainy Dublin, Ireland. First of all, let me say I'm delighted about your invitation to speak at this really important event today. I'm delighted to see the Regional Centre taking such strong leadership in such an important topic, not just for the region, but increasingly globally. I'm going to try and actually, I'm going to share my screen. I'm not going to try, I'm going to do it. Okay. Are people able to see my screen?
Yes, Matthias, it is.
That's great, thank you.
Yes,
and I do have to apologize for speaking to you in English today because unfortunately I don't have any Arabic. I would like to start with a few pictures. Just a few photos I've collected in recent years in different parts of the world. Just to remind ourselves that what we are talking about. We're talking about early childhood development, early childhood education and care as something that is both inevitably local. We're seeing places here in Kenya, in New York, in Bogota, Colombia, in New Mexico, in the neighborhood in East London where I used to live before I moved to Ireland some years ago. We can easily recognize these just by walking past them as early childhood settings, but still they're all different. They're all very much embedded in their local community, in their local culture, in their local in the local history of child rearing and what it means to be a child, to grow up in the society. At the same time, we're also increasingly talking about a matter of global concern, and especially in the times we're in at the moment, which are times of global uncertainty, of disruption, and it's increasingly important to recognize this and to engage in global conversations about how to build more integrated, more resilient, and more sustainable early childhood systems. The thoughts I'm sharing with you this morning are the result of a collaboration over several years now, mainly within the context of the annual process of the Group of 20, the G20, and is more specifically within one of the official engagement groups of the G20, which is the T20, Think 20. And I have to express my gratitude specifically to Saudi Arabia in 2020 for giving us such strong endorsement and such strong support for bringing early childhood development, education and care to that global audience. We have published and developed a series of policy briefs beginning in the T20 in 2018, hosted by Argentina, through to T20 hosted in 2019 in Japan, and now this year 2020 in Saudi Arabia, and we're preparing to move into 2021 when Italy, and then in 2022 India will take the presidency of this really important global forum. The policy briefs that we've been developing build on one another, and they really make an argument beginning in 2018 for integrated early childhood policy frameworks and for the active role that governments play in supporting what we call the development of competence systems for children, families, and communities. We put an emphasis on locally and culturally appropriate early childhood systems for all children in our documents developed in 2019. And I think crucially, we're focusing on questions of how, if we think that early childhood programs, in order to be effective, have to be locally embedded in local communities, how can we think about upscaling these local programs, bring them to scale so that all children and all families benefit. Just briefly to name my collaborators, because this is sort of a large international collaboration that I have the privilege to coordinate. Dr. Jennifer Guevara, who works with us at the Early Childhood Research Center here in Dublin. Our colleague Alejandra Cardini, who works for the Center of the Implementation of Public Policies for Equity and Growth in Buenos Aires, Argentina. Lynette Okengo, who coordinates the African Early Childhood Network based in Nairobi, Kenya. My dear friend and colleague Rita Flores Romero, who runs the research group on cognition and languages in early childhood at the National University of Colombia in Bogota. Dr. Claudia Costin, working for the Center of Excellence and Innovation in Education Policy in Sao Paulo, Brazil. And last but not least, Dr. Twig Briono, who chairs and directs the Southeast Asian Ministers of Education Organization Regional Center for Early Childhood Care, Education and Parenting in Jakarta, Indonesia. So it's a collaboration that I'm speaking for today. Moving on to another picture that sort of illuminates the global local connection in our field. These are a number of pictures I took some years ago at a workshop with early childhood educators from a number of sub-Saharan African countries in Nairobi. And teachers, educators came together to talk about challenges they're facing in their workplace, challenges they're facing in their field. And if you look at the priority list people come up with, I think it would be quite easy for any of us who are familiar with this field in any region of the world to identify quite a number of these points being sort of collected here and compiled by our colleagues in the African region. It's the question of how to recognize early childhood as part of a wider system, the education system. It's the question of qualifications. It's the questions of working conditions and salaries. It's also the question of professional autonomy. And we see a number of systems challenges in terms of threats to the professional identity of teachers. And increasingly, we're seeing on a global scale moves towards deprofessionalizing early child education and care. At the same time, where countries are still putting a lot of effort into professionalizing the system. So it is a global scenario that we're talking about, which plays out in very concrete terms locally. We do start this discussion from a global consensus, and we have to remind ourselves that this is a story of success, that we have a broad global consensus based on solid evidence, and we're going to hear some of this evidence in the presentations today, that early childhood programs provided they are of high quality. And I think this is really important, that it's not any early childhood program, but programs that are of high quality are beneficial to children, their families and communities, and to society on the whole, on a very broad range of indicators, including social cohesion, and increasingly in increasingly unequal and sometimes divided societies. Building on this consensus, the final communique of the T20 in Tokyo in 2019, which is the document that summarizes all the policy recommendations that are handed over to the leaders of the G20, says the following. It says there is the need, and this has been adopted by the G20, there is a need to strengthen a commitment to advancing access to locally and culturally appropriate quality early childhood development, early child education and care for all children from birth, and to build international consensus on government responsibility for a whole systems approach to those policies. And I think there are some really important elements in here. First of all, it is bringing together in a bracket this commitment to early childhood experiences for children that are locally and culturally appropriate, but doing that build on a global consensus. Second, we're talking about all children. We're talking about equity. We're talking about cherishing diversity and making sure that all children, but especially the most vulnerable, benefit from our investments and from our activities. And thirdly, and I think this is really what I want to stress today, that this doesn't just happen. It has to be facilitated, it has to be initiated, it has to be organized, and there is government responsibility to do this across all government departments, which does not mean that government is the only actor in this field, but governments have a key responsibility as enablers of this. But we do know, and on the other hand, and you're familiar with this, that a huge challenge remains for state actors to enact this commitment, and in particular to develop policies that enable the bringing to scale of community-based early childhood solutions. So what we're seeing, and I think this is quite encouraging when we look at the discussion in over the past, say, especially say 10 years, 5 to 10 years, that countries in both the global north and the global south are increasingly adopting policy frameworks that address early childhood from a holistic perspective, instead of disconnected, fragmented programs and individual sort of piecemeal solutions. Increasingly, we're seeing countries taking bold steps towards integrated early childhood development, education and care as policy frameworks, and making efforts to implement these systems. We have some examples, and we could add to the list. The European Union, for instance, has given itself a quality framework for early child education and care, which clearly comes from a systemic perspective. The country where I work and live at the moment has published a 10-year strategy for early childhood called First Five, which is specifically called a whole of government strategy for babies, young children, and families, going across government departments. We have the comprehensive care strategy de Cero Siempre in Colombia. We have other examples from South America. We have Uruguay, Crece Contigo, and many examples. We have examples from the Southeast Asian region that all go in the same direction. The argument I'm bringing to you today is that these policies urgently require new and effective approaches to governments, to resourcing, to professional preparation and evaluation at all levels of the early childhood system to achieve what we call competent systems for children, families, and communities. But they also point to the need, and I think to the possibility for shared learning from and with and between policy and practice initiatives in the global south and north. And I think this is a real opportunity that we can't afford to miss. Looking forward, or backward actually, looking back to already to 2020, we can see that the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, has disrupted programs to support young children, their families and communities in all affected countries, to various extents, but in all affected countries, in all regions in the global south and north. This disruption of services has had immediate effects, as you know, negative effects on children and families, on the early childhood workforce, on society and economy.
Yes, Basim, yes. Yeah. Okay. Shall we move into the next interview, please? Nahala, I hope you have the calendar.
Yes, I have it, but I'm trying to open it. It's not opening, so.
Okay, am I missing something?
No, go ahead. I think somebody had the mic on and it's okay.
Yeah,
someone. I just already muted.
Okay. So what we've seen is that countries, and I include the country that I'm in at the moment, countries had to learn very fast, and they had to learn the hard way, that early childhood services are actually essential public services. We also have seen, and I think we're going to hear more about this during the day, that the disruption of these services has compounded existing inequalities and quite often created new ones. So inequality is a key term in our discussion. Just to summarize briefly, effects on children, we've seen the disappearance of stimulating play and learning opportunities in social settings. We have seen the disappearance of safe spaces outside the family home. We have seen an increasing lack of access to very basic facilities, including nutrition, basic hygiene, healthcare, running water in some cases. And this affects young children in both affluent and poor countries. It affects children to a large extent, for instance, in the European region, one of the most affluent regions of the world. While all children are affected, inequalities within countries, and this is really important, inequalities within countries exacerbate the situation for children from the most marginalized communities, children from rural communities, from indigenous communities, from migrant communities, from displaced communities, mainly from poor children. So what we are seeing is that the COVID-19 crisis carries the risk of developing into a global child's rights crisis. Effects on families, we've seen collapse of reliable childcare, which often contributed to and aggravated the sudden loss of income for families. And we've seen this being particularly severe for key workers, say healthcare workers, who were sometimes not able to actually fulfill their roles because of the lack of childcare, the disappearance of childcare, and the general, quite often, very serious disruption of parenting supports. Effects on society and economy, immediately we've seen the closure of schools and preschools and childcare services has impeded countries' abilities to respond to the immediate health crisis. I mentioned key workers, healthcare workers already, that had to stay at home to look after the children and have become unavailable for what we now have come to call their frontline roles. Many educators, early childhood practitioners already in precarious employment in many countries have lost their livelihoods. And in the medium and long term, what we're seeing in quite a number of countries, especially where we see a heavy reliance on private for-profit provision, we see business models of providing early childhood service collapsing, and we have increasingly serious discussions about whether or not services will be able to reopen after the pandemic, because that business model has become unviable. So on a macro scale, what we're seeing is that the lack of reliable and sustainable services for young children and their families already has serious implications for countries to restart, what a term, their economies post-pandemic. Let's go back to the question of inequality for a moment. I think these are two photos that I would like to bring to you without much further explanation. These are two early childhood settings not far from each other. They're actually pretty close. In one of the capital cities of the countries that we work in. And and I'm just giving you a quote here from a study published by Education International some years ago, saying that early childhood education systems differ greatly, not only across countries, but within and between countries. And I think this within countries is something that we should take very seriously, because going back to what I mentioned earlier, this necessity and possibility of engaging in conversations across countries really leads us to see that many of the issues we're dealing with are not issues that are specifically located in the global south or in the global north, but they are actually located around inequalities within countries and regions. And we need to learn from countries who are addressing these issues in much more efficient and effective ways than others. Some preliminary policy lessons from that I think are emerging from the pandemic. First of all, I mentioned this, early child development, early child education and care is an essential public service. It should be treated as a common good. Early childhood provides the foundation for society. It's not just another sector of the economy. Another key policy lesson is that inequality is the major contributing factor to the problem. It's about unequal access to and unequal quality of early childhood programs between and most importantly within countries. It is about digital equality. We've seen an enormous effort by the education system in many countries to move to online provision. It is very difficult to provide meaningful early childhood services online, even though we've seen tremendous efforts of countries and of services to do just that. What we have seen is that countries who have adopted already more integrated early childhood systems quite often found it easier to switch from one mode of delivery to another, and to actually stay close to the families, close to the communities, and support them while actual services were closed. We do know that there are a number of risk factors and exacerbating factors for the crisis in most countries. And again, this is sort of an issue that is not specific to one particular global region. One is it's a critical lack of data, and especially a lack of disaggregated data on children from diverse ethnic, cultural, socioeconomic, and geographical backgrounds. And again, with some notable exceptions in countries that have already adopted integrated policy frameworks, who seem to have much better mechanisms for data gathering and knowledge exchange. We do see, and this is not new, and anybody familiar with this area will have made this argument over and over again, chronic and persistent underfunding of services and systems, but this is now beginning to be recognized increasingly at policy level. We see a critical fragmentation of services and quite often a lack of strategy, leadership, cross-sectoral policy coordination, and quite often hands-off policy approaches, leaving the sector to itself. But we've also seen unprecedented state intervention in some countries, practically nationalizing the early childhood system during the pandemic, just to prevent its collapse. But again, what we're seeing, and this is specific. We're seeing this specifically in connection to poorer countries in sub-Saharan Africa, for instance, that some of the economic stimulus packages handed to these countries are again risking pushing these countries into unsustainable debt due to a lack of international solidarity and international coordination.
Dr. Matthews, you have 3 minutes.
Yes, and I'm getting there. I'm aware of time, so I'm just briefly showing you this priority list from our colleagues in Nairobi to remind ourselves that we are actually dealing with with shared and common issues here. From the policy briefs that I mentioned at the very beginning, I think we can extract a number of policy choices that we might discuss with our decision makers in our governments. And I'm just going to give you a few here. Some of them are really about recognizing the potential and contribution of comprehensive, accessible, community-based and well-resourced early childhood programs to social cohesion, and to adopt social cohesion, for instance, as an acknowledged and central goal of national early childhood policies. Second, to look at comprehensive early childhood services that are, on the one hand, responsive to the capabilities and needs of communities, and on the other hand, are essential elements of national strategies to counter inequality, social division, and in some countries, post-conflict tensions in society. Other policy choices that we would put forward are about combining national government strategies, central frameworks, integrated policy frameworks with equally strong support for local democratic structures, connecting the local and the national, which would involve resourcing, which means funding, not only, but crucially funding local structures to ensure communities are empowered to develop and implement services that are responsive and that are locally and culturally embedded, and provide the services that are needed based on local expertise. This, of course, and I think this is moving into a space where early childhood becomes part of a much broader national debate about what is the purpose, what is the aspiration, what is the possibility that we associate not just with early childhood programs, but with our responsibility as societies for the youngest citizens for growing up in our societies. Connected to the critical issue of the lack of data, one critical policy recommendation, I don't think it's a choice, it's actually something that needs to be enacted immediately, is the question of monitoring, evaluation, and data collection systems that ensure that all stakeholders at local and regional and national level are heard in a process of defining and developing the best possible quality of early childhood services. And I've included some of the stakeholders here, but of course, this is just the beginning. So, really looking forward, and this is my last slide, I suppose one of the questions that we're looking at and that I would like to put to you for discussion is really the question of how can we restructure early childhood services? How can we understand them as a vital public service? How can we strengthen what the G20 says, the government responsibility for locally and culturally appropriate services? And how can we learn with and from countries that have already adopted integrated services? The main question, and I think we're all realizing finally that the COVID-19 pandemic is not sort of a unique standalone crisis. The likelihood of existential crisis arising at global scale is increasing. This will, I suppose, require fundamental reorientation of education and care at all levels, but beginning with young children from birth. And I suppose one of the ways to enter this discussion would really be to look at how to align early childhood education care much more clearly and closely with a global sustainability agenda, not just look at SDG 4, achieving access to early child education care for all children, but seeing early childhood as an enabler to achieve sustainability on a global scale. The question is not so much how can we sort of roll out programs, how can we measure children's learnings against predetermined outcomes, questions that we've been struggling with for many years. But I think it's a much more existential question. What should we be educating for in order to ensure survival of humanity on a finite planet? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Matthias. Thank you for this paper. And I apologize that I didn't introduce you to the people in the first of the session, but I will do now. دكتور ماتيوس حاصل على الدكتوراه وهو رئيس ديزمونز للتعليم في مرحلة الطفولة المبكرة ورئيس مركز أبحاث الطفولة المبكرة بجامعة مدينة دبلن وأستاذ بجامعة ستانفورد وعضو مركز السياسة التعليمية بجامعة جورج ماسون ويعمل أوريون على إيجاد إجابات للأسئلة حول الأنظمة المتكاملة للطفولة المبكرة والتنوع والمساواة والعدالة الاجتماعية والاحترافية في السياقات الاجتماعية والثقافية المتنوعة. يمتلك بروفيسور ماتيوس خبرة اكتسبها على مدار 20 عاماً في مجال تصميم وقيادة المشروعات البحثية التعاونية، وقد تم تصنيف عمله كإنجاز ريادي على المستوى العالمي وإنجاز ممتاز على المستوى الدولي ضمن إطار امتيازات الأبحاث بالمملكة المتحدة، وحصل على جائزة ماريان بلوخ للمسيرة المهنية المتميزة المقدمة من الشبكة الدولية لإعادة تصور مفاهيم التعليم في مرحلة الطفولة المبكرة في عام 2018، وجائزة رئيس جامعة مدينة دبلن لتأثير الأبحاث لعام 2020. وبروفيسور ماتيوس هو المؤلف الرئيسي لموجة السياسات الخاص بالنماء والتعليم والرعاية في الطفولة المبكرة المقدمة ضمن فعاليات قمة مجموعة ال20 مجموعة الفكر T20 والتي أقيمت في 2018 و2019 و2020 بالمملكة العربية السعودية، وعضو فريق الخبراء العامل المعني بالتعليم والرعاية في مرحلة الطفولة المبكرة التابع للمفوضية الأوروبية. Thank you, Matthias, for your paper. And now we will go to the second paper. But before we go to the second paper, I just need to announce للمشاركين لدينا في الندوة بالنسبة للترجمة هناك توجد ترجمة بالضغط على الزر اللي موجود رسمة الكرة الأرضية. كذلك يمكن لكم طرح الأسئلة على المحاضرين من خلال الضغط على زر question and answer الموجود أمامكم وكتابة السؤال حتى نستطيع أن نوجهه للخبراء في نهاية الجلسة. الورقة الثانية بعنوان التأثير الطويل المدى لرعاية الطفولة المبكرة والتعليم من الناحية الأكاديمية والاجتماعية والاقتصادية سوف يقدمها لنا البروفيسور إدوارد مولتشوش من جامعة أكسفورد. بروفيسور إدوارد هو أستاذ التنمية البشرية بجامعة أكسفورد وعمل مديراً لمشروع التقييم المحلي لبرنامج شورت ستارت منذ عام 2000 إلى 2012 ومشروع التعليم الفعال في مرحلة ما قبل المدرسة والمرحلة الابتدائية والمرحلة الثانوية. وأجري حالياً بروفيسور ملتوس دراسات طولية على 4000 طفل في إنجلترا والنرويج والتي ساهمت في السياسة الاجتماعية في المملكة المتحدة للأسر والخدمات والتعليم في السنوات المبكرة، بما في ذلك توفير التعليم في مرحلة ما قبل المدرسة لجميع الأطفال من سن 3 إلى 4 سنوات، وإنشاء 3500 مركز للأطفال، واستراتيجية الحكومة كل الأطفال متساوون في الأهمية، واستراتيجية رعاية الطفل التي تستغرق 10 سنوات، والتعليم المبكر للأطفال في سن العامين للأطفال الأشد حرماناً الذين تبلغ نسبتهم 40%. وقد أجرى البروفيسور أبحاثاً في 12 بلداً. أثرت الأبحاث التي أجراها عام 80 على قانون الطفل لعام 1989، وأثرت أبحاث لاحقة على قانون الطفل لعام 2005 ومشروع قانون رعاية الطفل لعام 2006 والسياسات الخاصة برعاية الطفل والتعليم المبكر وفقر الأطفال ودعم الوالدين في العديد من البلدان. كما أجرى أبحاثاً لمجلس الأبحاث الطبية ومجلس الأبحاث الاقتصادية والاجتماعية وصندوق إنقاذ الطفولة ووزارة التربية والتعليم والعديد من المؤسسات، وهو شاهد خبير في لجنة مجلس العلوم المنتخبة ومستشار علمي لمجلس أبحاث بلدان الشمال الأوروبي وأكاديمية فنلندا ومجلس الأبحاث البرتقالي ومجلس الأبحاث الألماني والأسترالي وفي كوريا الجنوبية وكندا وشيلي. دكتور إدوارد, you can start.
Okay.
Thank you.
It's a great pleasure to be at this meeting today. And I want to talk to you about the long-term impact of early childhood care and education on children and what lessons this has for policy and practice. Now, let's see.
It's open, Doctor.
Yes, okay.
You can see it.
Yes, I'm trying to control it here.
Okay.
Hang on. Yes, here we see some data from a report by UNESCO on the rating of countries' early childhood services. And we see at the top, the Scandinavian countries and the UK and Belgium. And then about halfway down in red, we see the United Arab Emirates. And so that shows that there are very big differences between countries in the quality of their early childhood services. Now, why should we focus on early childhood? Well, there are three strands of evidence that support the importance of the early years. One is neuroscience, which shows the importance of early brain development. Then we have developmental science, which shows that high quality early childhood care and education can improve children's life chances. And then we have economics, which shows that high quality early childhood care and education can save significant amounts of money over time for countries. And early childhood contributes to creating the population and workforce needed for success in the 21st century. First of all, neuroscience. Everything we do, feel, or say from infancy to death reflects brain function. At birth, we have 100 billion neurons. That's all you ever get. Everything after that is downhill. What brain development is about synapses. Synapses increase at 700 per second in the early years, and 60% of the nutrition given to an infant in the first year is used in brain development. By age 3, 80% of synaptic connections are made. Now, in this early development, we have a process called pruning of synapses, which are not reinforced by experience. A synapse forms. If it's reinforced by experience, it's kept. If it's not reinforced by experience, it drops out. So it's a principle of use it or lose it. Synapse development influences brain plasticity, the capacity of the brain to learn from experience. And this declines with age. To illustrate the effects of synapses, here's some slides from a neuroanatomist called Connell, who looked at brain development over the lifespan. And here we see some slides of a particular section of the brain at different ages. At birth, we see several neurons, but very little interconnection between those neurons, very few synapses. At 2 years, masses of synapses, many synapses. Then the same area of the brain at 6 years, many synapses, but a lot less than at 2 years. What has happened between 2 years and 6 years? Well, what has happened is that those synapses which were not reinforced by experience drop out, and only the synapses reinforced by experience are kept. Okay. Now, here we see a slide which shows the rate of synapse development at different ages. And 0 is birth. Then we have 3, 6, 9 months of age, then 1 year of age, 4 years of age, 8 years of age, 12 years of age, 16 years of age. And we see lines representing the vision and hearing area of the brain in red, the language area in blue, and then higher cognitive functions in green. I'm going to focus on the blue line, the language line. I'm going to focus on this because this is particularly important in early childhood. We see a peak around 9 months, which then falls off to 4 to 5 years of age. Now, on seeing that peak, most people initially think, oh, at 9 months, that's when most development is taking place. But it's not. Most development is taking place in that fall-off period from 9 months through to 4 to 5 years of age. Because what is happening is the brain is setting itself up by the end of the first year so that the child could learn any language that might ever occur in human beings. But of course, the child does not learn every language that might occur. It only learns the language of its environment. And so all those synapses which have to do with language experiences that the child does not have drop out. And that means that that period up to 4 to 5 years is a very critical period for language development. And of course, those who work in early childhood are working with children in this age range. So their experiences they're providing for children will have a profound effect on language. Now, here's some data from some American psychologists called Hart and Risley, who looked at the language heard in a home in different kinds of homes. Some families were on welfare, very poor, very disadvantaged families. Then we have ordinary working class families. Then we have professional families. And we see that over the first 4 years of life, the children in the welfare families have heard about 12 million words. In the working class families, they've heard about 25 million words. And in the professional families, they've heard 42 million words. So there's a 30 million word gap between what the child in a professional family hears versus a child in a welfare family. Now, if you give one child 30 million words more language experience than another child, what do you think is going to happen? Well, you don't need to be a brain scientist to work that out. Basically, this is the language development of the children in these kinds of homes over the first 3 years. We see in red the vocabulary scores for the children of professional families, in blue those of working class families, and in green those of welfare families. By 3 years of age, a very big gap has emerged. That gap just gets bigger as children get older. Now, here's another graph. This represents brain growth in the cortex, total gray matter in the cortex, for high social class families, middle class families in brown, and low poor families in blue. And we see over the first year that there's very little difference. But then after the first year, the pattern of growth starts to change, with the children, the professional families in green showing higher brain growth than in the other families. And that reflects, again, the higher level of learning opportunities being provided in those environments. Now, here's data from a very well-known study called the Perry Preschool Project, which took place in America. It took place with 123 Black African-American children growing up in an area near Detroit, and they were all very poor. And this study started in the 1960s. And so we have long-term data now on these children. And half the children were provided with a program, which was early childhood care and education from age 3 upwards. The other half of the children did not receive anything. These children were from the same neighborhoods, so they went to the same schools. They're growing up in the same neighborhoods. So the only thing differing between these two groups was whether they had early childhood care and education or not. And what you see is at age 40, the children who had the early childhood care and education in red are showing greater earnings, more employment, more likely to have their own car, more likely to have their savings accounts. So our economic indicators they're doing a lot better. Then on behavioral indicators like discipline problems in school, being arrested, violent crime, drug crime, they're also doing a lot better. So on a variety of indicators, the children who have received early childhood care and education are doing better. And this is really long-term data. This data has been supported right across the total lives of these children, and we now have data up to age 60. It was calculated that the cost of the program in this peri-preschool project was about $12,000. But the savings, because of the better development of the children, were $88,000 by age 21. That's a cost-benefit ratio of 71, and $185,000 by age 40. That's a cost-benefit ratio of 16:1. So the economic savings are very great. Okay, now moving on. Now, peri-preschool project is a very interesting study, but it's a very small study with a very restricted population in a very small part of the USA. So in the UK, we decided to do a large-scale population representative sample of families and their early childhood education and care experience, and then follow these children long-term. And we recruited over 3,000 children from across England for this study. And when we looked at these children at age 5, when they're starting school, some of these children had had 2 to 3 years of early childhood care and education. Other children had had 1 to 2 years of early childhood care and education. And some children had no early childhood education and care at all. And they're at the 0 line across the bottom. And we see that the more years of early childhood education and care that the children receive, the better they do. But as well as that, the blue bars represent low quality provision. The red bars represent average quality provision, and the green bars represent high quality provision. And we see that the quality of the provision also affects their development. So both the quality and the duration of early childhood education and care makes a difference. Now, we followed these children through, right the way through their school careers. And here's data at age 16 on literacy and numeracy. And we're seeing here the effects of different factors on literacy and numeracy. We see family income has an effect. Mother's education has the biggest effect. Father's education has an effect. Socioeconomic status has an effect. The home learning environment, what happens in the home to stimulate children, has an effect. And then whether they went to an effective preschool or not preschool at all has an effect on literacy and also a big effect on numeracy. So, and then we have the effect of the primary school and then the effect of the secondary school. Now, the home learning environment was measured when the children were 3. And the effective preschool is the experience in preschool before the children go to school. And we see those early childhood factors are affecting development many, many years later. But it's not just on academic outcomes. We can look at social outcomes like self-regulation and pro-social behavior. Self-regulation refers to the capacity of the child to control their behavior. Pro-social behavior refers to empathy and sharing and so on. And here we see the effect of quality. Those low quality is in yellow, average quality is in red, and high quality is in blue. And we see those children who went to high quality centers are scoring better on self-regulation and on pro-social behavior many, many years later, after controlling for all of the demographic factors. We then looked at the likelihood of children in these 3,000 children, the likelihood of these 3,000 children showing special needs over the course of their school careers. And on the left-hand side, we see the risk for children with no early childhood care and education, and their risk factor is 1. And then we have children who have low quality versus none. And we see that where they have low quality, the risk of special needs reduces. Where they have medium quality, it reduces a little bit more. And when they have high quality, it reduces yet again. And the risk of special needs for children who have high quality education, after allowing for all of the other factors, is almost 60% less than if the child has no early childhood education and care, showing the importance of early childhood education and care, again, for special needs. So from this study, we concluded that from age 2, all children benefit from preschool. The quality of preschool matters. We also found that part-time provision had equal benefit for full-time provision. So children who were going for 15 to 20 hours a week were doing equally well for children who went for 30 to 40 hours a week. The preschool effects persisted certainly till the teenagers in this study, and in later follow-ups, we've seen it persisting until the adult years. High quality preschool can protect a child from the effect of a low effective school. We found that those children who went to the high quality preschools were able to learn even if the quality of teaching in their school was rather low. Whereas those children who didn't have early childhood education care were much more affected by the quality of teaching in the school. We see primary school effects are very strong for the numeracy, and we also see secondary school effects are strong. Moving on. This study affected policy in the UK quite profoundly. In 2004, a free early childhood education and care place was available for every child from 3 years upwards of 15 hours a week. In 2013, this free place was taken down to 2 years of age for the 40% most deprived families. And then in 2017, the 15 hours a week was increased to 30 hours a week. And all of these you see in the government reports, they quote the research as supporting these policy changes. We also found evidence which supported the increase in maternity leave to 1 year after the birth. We also influenced a new early years curriculum for children and new training programs for early years staff. And we see now an acceptance across all political parties that early years provision is part of state responsibility. But now looking internationally, we see evidence is consistent. Early childhood education is an essential part of the infrastructure for optimizing global well-being. In the USA, we see early childhood education improves educational attainment, particularly for the disadvantaged, as we see in the Peri-Preschool project. In Norway, France, and Switzerland, where we can look at data for the whole population and where they provided early childhood education and care gradually across those countries, we see that the provision of early childhood education for the population has increased education, increased employment opportunities, and increased incomes for those children who receive the early childhood education. In Denmark, they looked at data for the whole population, where they're able to relate the quality of care provided by individual children across the school to what happens across their school careers. And they found that high quality early childhood education, rather than low quality, produced better educational outcomes at 16 years. In Northern Ireland, we did a parallel study to the study in England, where they have a slightly different system. And we found that early childhood education and care increased the grades in literacy by 2.4 times, and in mathematics by 3.4 times. So, for example, in mathematics, if you had high quality early childhood education and care versus none at all, you were over 3 times as likely to get a high grade in mathematics after allowing for all the other factors. Here's some data from the World Bank on Latin America. And we see in red the percentage of the population who are attending preschool. And you see there's very big differences across these Latin American countries. Then we have in blue the literacy scores in the 6th grade of children in these countries. And we see that shows big variation between these countries. And then in green, we have under 5 mortality, the chances of dying or having a serious illness in the first 5 years. And we see that the blue line and the green and the red line go up almost together indicating a strong association between providing preschool and getting good literacy scores for the population. And of course, then you get an opposite effect for under 5 mortality where that decreases. Now let's look at Cuba. Why is Cuba doing so well? Is it because Cuba is a richer country than the other countries? No, it's not. Countries like Argentina and Chile are considerably richer than Cuba. But Cuba, with its resources, puts a high priority on early childhood services. They have polyclinics to provide health services from pregnancy onwards. They have a daycare for those parents who need it from birth onwards. They have early childhood education for the whole population. And what this emphasis on early childhood services does is it means that Cuba outperforms on economic and social characteristics the other populations in Latin America. Now, moving on. So we see across a wide range of different forms of evidence, very small scale studies, large scale studies, population-wide studies, cross-country comparisons, all showing the same pattern of evidence, that early childhood education and care produces benefits. The benefits include educational achievement, reduced special educational needs, behavior problems, delinquency and crime are reduced, employment, earnings and welfare dependency are improved, smoking, drug use, depression are reduced. This, of course, leads to the decreased costs to government in terms of schooling costs, social service costs, crime costs, and healthcare costs. Now, there have been various estimates of what this saving is worth. What is the benefit to cost ratio? Some studies have found it as 2 to 1. That is, the savings are twice as great as the costs. Some studies find 16 to 1. What's interesting across all of these economic studies is always the benefits are greater than the costs, that there is a positive benefit cost ratio in every study. Now, in our English study, we found that there were particular centers which had most benefit for children. And we then had case studies of these very effective centers versus average centers to ask what made a difference. And the answer is interactions drive development. 5 areas were particularly important for differentiating effective preschools. The quality of adult-child verbal interaction, that is a very good language environment for the children. The knowledge and understanding of the curriculum, knowing what you want to do with the children. The knowledge of young children's development, how young children learn. Adult skill in supporting children in resolving conflicts, helping their social development. And also helping parents provide learning opportunities at home. Because we found consistently in our studies and in international studies that what happens in the home is also very important for learning. We also found a particular kind of interaction called sustained shared thinking, which only occurred in the effective centers. It didn't occur in the not effective centers. And this is where an adult and child interact over a prolonged period to jointly solve a problem, with the adult feeding information to the child in order for the child to solve the problem. This kind of interaction is very useful for developing language skills and also for developing self-regulation, the capacity of the child to control and plan their behavior. And we found it a particularly important characteristic of effective preschools. Now, another factor which we found important is self-regulation. Here we have the effects of early childhood education and care on self-regulation at age 10. On the left, we see the home children who had no early childhood care and education. Then we had the low quality, which is basically the same as the home children. Then we have medium quality and high quality, which show distinct improvements in self-regulation. What do we mean by self-regulation? Well, here's how we measured it at age 5. Does the child think things through before acting? Is the child distracted easily? Can the child move on to a new activities on completion of a task? Can the child independently select and return equipment? Does the child squirm or fidget about? Does the child persevere? Does the child like to work things out for himself? is a child not restless? Does a child see through tasks to its end? And we rate the children on these characteristics. And what we find is
Dr. Edward, you have 2 minutes.
Okay, I will finish quickly. What we find is self-regulation changes rapidly. Here we see in the first 3 years, there's very low self-regulation. Then between 3 and 6, which are the preschool years, we've seen a very rapid increase in self-regulation. Then it starts to slacken off across the school years. So again, the early years are very important for self-regulation. This leads us to develop a model to integrate these findings. We have interactions in the home affecting language development and self-regulation. We have child characteristics like temperament and gender affecting language development and self-regulation. We have interactions in the preschool, the early childhood education and care, affecting language development and self-regulation. And the level of language development and self-regulation at the start of school then goes on to affect later educational development like literacy and numeracy, but also social emotional development. So when you adopt this model, you see that language development and self-regulation are particularly critical aspects of development in the early years. Therefore, we need to have professional development programs which enhance language development and self-regulation, and we've been developing programs to do this. Okay, so interactions drive development. Interactions both in the home and in early childhood care and education have effects on developmental outcomes. And the effects for language development and self-regulation are particularly important for long-term outcome. Therefore, interactions fostering language development and self-regulation are particularly important aspects of the quality in early childhood care and education. Overall lessons, early years are very important. Early childhood care and education is part of the infrastructure for a successful society. High quality early childhood care and education boosts development, but parenting is also very important, and so parenting support can work. Early childhood care and education lifts a population curve. Everybody benefits. However, disadvantaged children benefit particularly from high quality early childhood care and education. And there I will finish my talk. And if you want some bedtime reading, here we are. And that's the end of the talk. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Professor Edward. Thanks for this paper where you give us a view of the importance of early childhood and what can we benefit if we are invest very well in this in this stage of children life. Thank you. And now we will go to the third paper. The third paper will be presented by Ms. Louise Ruskin. She's a specialist in field of early childhood and education in the World Bank. دكتورة لويس راسكين أخصائية في مجال الرعاية والتعليم في مرحلة الطفولة المبكرة من البنك الدولي. سوف تقدم لنا ورقة بعنوان ما هي الإجراءات التي يمكن اتخاذها لإدارة آثار فيروس كوفيد-19 على تعلم الأطفال ورفاهيتهم. مس لويس متخصصة في مجال التعليم وتمتلك خبرة اكتسبتها على مدار 30 عاماً في القطاع، وهي أخصائية في مجال الرعاية والتعليم في مرحلة الطفولة المبكرة. وعملت لويس وقامت بالكثير من البلدان حول العالم بما فيها ذلك أكثر من عقد قضته في بلدان الخليج، فهي على معرفة كاملة بواقع دول الخليج في هذه المرحلة. واستلهمت مسيرتها المهنية بالعمل كمدرسة بمدرسة ابتدائية في لندن، ثم انتقلت إلى الإقامة في تركيا، المجر وكازاخستان، حيث اكتسبت خبرة كبيرة في مجال الطفولة المبكرة وقيادتها وإدارتها وتدريب المدرسين وتقديم الدعم لشراكات القطاع الخاص في إدارة المدارس وتطوير الاستراتيجيات. وانتقلت لويس بعد ذلك للقطاع العام منذ أكثر من عقد، واكتسبت خبرة في دول الخليج من خلال عملها في السعودية والكويت والإمارات ودول أخرى في الخليج، حيث عملت ضمن مشروع خاص بوزارة التربية والتعليم وفي إدارة أول حضانة وتقديم الدعم لتطوير أنظمة وإجراءات وطنية للرعاية والتعليم في مرحلة الطفولة المبكرة. كما انضمت لويس للعمل لدى البنك الدولي في عام 2017 لتتولى تقديم الدعم لبرامج الإنماء في مرحلة الطفولة المبكرة في السعودية والكويت والمغرب. لويس, you can start.
Shukran jazilan. Thank you very much.
There's a new information he didn't tell you. Which speak Arabic.
I think, Dr. Maha, you've raised the bar a little there. I think Shukran jazilan is probably all there is. I'd like to thank His Excellency and yourself, Ms. Maha, and the entire team for this opportunity. It's a wonderful opportunity to be sharing this stage with some amazing expertise that's just preceded me and will come afterwards. Before I put my slideshow up, I just wanted to share something. I was watching the BBC News a couple of days ago, and there was a young woman, a student, university student, very articulate, who was sharing her experiences and representing students, university students, saying how difficult it had been with the COVID situation, the challenges in terms of the learning, their courses, the social lives, and so on. And it occurred to me, I mean, we know this anyway, but it really brought into sharp relief as listening to this young woman. But our youngest children around the world, they don't have this opportunity. They're not able to sit and give that kind of interview and explain the challenges that they are facing under the current crisis, nor even the cognitive ability to understand those challenges. So this session is very important, and it's a bit of a call to arms that us in the profession, we really need to be there to be the voice for these young children. So I'm going to share my screen, and forgive me, also take my video off because the bandwidth here is sometimes not very, I'm speaking to you from Saudi Arabia, by the way, just to let you know where I am. Is everybody able to see my screen well enough there?
Yes, it's on.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, so, oh, and I need to be changing. There we go. Okay. So this session, we're going to be looking at the effects of the pandemic on young children and their families. I'm not going to labour too much on that because that's been well covered by my colleagues speaking previously. But then we're going to be looking at some strategies to support children in this context from around the world, under the 4 strategies and examples from around the world under each strategy. And then some questions at the end that I hope that all of the colleagues online will continue to ask each other, to speak about ourselves within the sector, and also to keep bringing to the table to key stakeholders and, importantly, decision makers. So we already know, and we've already spoken, actually Professor Matthias has covered very well some of the impacts of this COVID crisis on young children and their families. But I'll jump in, I think, on the issue of building human capital. You know, countries around the world have been increasingly focused on developing their human capital. And so for us in the early childhood sector, this has been a good thing. We can clearly demonstrate that there's this link between strategic investments in early childhood and the formation of human capital. And I think we've as been alluded before by the speakers before, we've had some increasing success, I think, in this. We can say that we've had some increasing investments and focus on this age group. But I think, unfortunately, what we've probably been seeing recently as we've entered this COVID-19 crisis is that there has been some slip back, let's say, and that energies and focus has been put into formal education, older students, students taking high stakes exams, for example. And that leads to the youngest children, again, being disproportionately represented because services to them, as we've already discussed, is often outside the formal systems, and so consequently are overlooked. Resources are scarce, they're being diverted into the pandemic response. Food insecurity will have a profound challenge for young children and their families. And as we've again already discussed, particularly problematic for this first 1,000 days of the child's development. And also we know from the Ebola crisis, for example, young children are more likely to experience violence, abuse and neglect in the home as families continue to struggle to cope with the situation. So during this time, how can we reach these children if they're not attending childcare centres and early childhood education centres? How can we reach them? We need to reach them by supporting the parents and the caregivers. So the nature of this pandemic actually places these parents and caregivers as first-line responders for children's survival and their care and learning. And that places an enormous burden on the families, especially the most vulnerable. And so we need to make these efforts to reach the children. We need to reach parents and caregivers. We need to provide income support, mental health support. We need to have encouragement, practical ideas of how to ensure continued learning and development in the home environment, and to mitigate any potential negative impacts of the crisis on early childhood development. So we have three goals, let's say broadly. We want to support and protect our sector of early childhood care and education. We want to help parents and caregivers protect and promote their children's development. And we want, where possible, and this speaks to Professor Edwards was speaking about that very important process quality, that, how do we have that quality early childhood care and education where we're not having that interaction with the child. So perhaps we want to find a way to ensure that children are returned to childcare centres and early childhood education centres as a priority. So in this next section, we'll look at those four strategies. And the first one is targeting childcare and psychosocial support. And I think, again, this was already brought up by Professor Matthias. This is, and actually, sorry, I just want to say something before we go into the examples. A number of the examples, in fact, many of the examples that we're going to be giving in this presentation of activities that governments take around the world were not developed actually in response to the pandemic. So they were designed to address challenges that have always existed in some countries, and perhaps are being, or not perhaps, are likely to be exacerbated by this crisis. And in some cases, they're challenges that are being faced for the first time in some countries. So, for example, reaching children in remote areas, children in fragile and conflict-affected regions where there are limited resources, the engagement of parents and caregivers, and taking that more holistic and intersectoral approach to supporting young children and their families. So these examples that I'm going to be going through momentarily, they address a challenge that is not necessarily unique to the COVID context, but can be adapted to the COVID context. So this childcare and the challenges resulting from the closures of childcare centres, as has already been mentioned, is on the frontline workers, the health professionals, the food producers, shopkeepers, and so on. So where the loss of childcare is likely to have contributed further to their levels of stress and fatigue. And so it's important to provide either continued childcare or emergency childcare so that these critical workers can continue with their work, and children are in safe and stimulating environments. And also connected to that, the importance of considering childcare workers themselves as frontline workers and ensuring that these people are provided with psychological support and health protection. So one example here of mobile and emergency childcare, these mobile creches. This was a World Bank project in Burkina Faso in 2013, and the bank launched a youth and employment skills development project. And under that, there was a public works component, and most of the participants were women. And they were trained and recruited for 6 months at a time in jobs such as building roads and environmental projects and so on. And the mobile childcare provision wasn't initially included in the design of the project, but it was during a field visit that the team noticed many of the public works participants, the ladies, were bringing their children to work because they didn't have child supervision arrangements at home. So the team developed a model of a formalised mobile childcare, and that would follow the women around as they move from work site to work site. Both the Ministry of National Education and the Ministry of Women, National Solidarity and Family, who between them were in charge of the birth to 6 educational content in the country. They worked together, and the mobile creches were set up, under a tree or perhaps an empty building that was offered by a local authority. UNICEF donated tents, communal vehicles, these sort of little tricycles, the hybrid motorbike pickup trucks were used to take the materials around. And the caregivers were trained by the Ministry of Education specialists. And there were women that showed particular talent, and they were offered extra employment, so they would do continual 6-month contracts. So it's an example of mobile childcare that could be adapted in some places to the COVID context, where, for example, frontline health workers need to work in a hospital, and a temporary mobile creche could be set up nearby to provide a safe and stimulating space for their children. Then we're looking at different now examples of platforms of distance learning. And there are questions, and I haven't included extensive time in this presentation to talk about how we address that. I've finished that as a question at the end, but how we address the lack of interaction with the child. But there are examples of how we can help parents and caregivers with the interaction with the children. So we'll look at distance learning platforms, radio, social media, television, and mobile phones. So distance education platforms, many countries and governments have established or extended existing online learning platforms. But it's important for us in our community to ensure that early childhood education, that age group, is included in these platforms. If not included in that platform, perhaps unique online learning is provided for the youngest children. So in this example here, we have the virtual kindergarten, which was established in Saudi Arabia, again, prior to the COVID-19 crisis. And it was established to reach children in remote areas. So those that don't know, Saudi Arabia is a very large country. There's a lot of remote areas. It was designed to improve parent and caregiver engagement, and also to support an increase in kindergarten enrollment. And it's an app. It has 11 progressive units. It's targeted for children from 3 to 7 years of age. And to date, they've reported they've been able to reach 21,000 kindergarten children and around about 20,000 parents. And I'm not sure, I can't see on the attendance list, but I believe that we might have a colleague from the Ministry of Education in Saudi Arabia online with us. So if she is, maybe she could answer any questions that you have about the virtual kindergarten later. So as this crisis, and as has already been discussed about lack of equality or equity, I should say, this crisis has really brought into sharp relief this issue. Not all families have access to good internet connections, and not all children have access to devices. Even in the UK, we're finding that some children are having to share one device between one device is being shared between 2, 3 or more children. So radio has been long used to reach children in their homes for education purposes in countries as diverse as Australia, and in this example I'm going to speak to in Malawi. This is an older example, it's from 2008, and this program was a series of 61 interactive audio instruction lessons. When IAI, which is quite tricky to say, and they were lessons that would be used in Malawi's community-based childcare centres. And these were centres where the surrounding communities brought their children to feed and for care. So the centres are staffed by folks from the community, so not qualified preschool teachers. And the project's goal was to contribute to changing these centres from spaces of guardianship to ones of meaningful early learning and social engagement. So the programme was developed to support foundational emergent literacy and numeracy skills, and aligned with the Malawi's national syllabus for early childhood development. And it also, out of the project, there were many training materials developed and a TOT manual. And there was an RCT that was undertaken, and it showed that the caregivers who received lessons under this program scored higher on measures of positive interaction with children than their control peers, again, going back to that process quality. And that the 3 to 5 year olds enrolled in the program acquired skills and concepts at a higher level than those that were not enrolled. So again, certainly a model which could be adapted to our context, where we're looking to upskill community members, parents and caregivers to support children's learning and development. We learn from colleagues and those who have been working in conflict affected and fragile contexts for many years. And we learn that the best way to mitigate potential harm, so this isn't just about the promotion of children's learning and development, but also about protecting them from toxic stress that, as we know, impacts on brain development. That in order to do that, once again, we need to support the parent and the caregiver so that they are in a position to provide that sense of security and to mitigate those potential harms to their child's development. Where possible, social media platforms are one way to provide key messages to parents on coping and nutrition, for example, their importance to get their understanding of their importance in the role of supporting their young child, and also to provide online communities where parents and caregivers can provide support to each other and share experiences. So just a couple of examples. Here's the Sharjah Child Friendly Office, which is responsible for supporting the rights of children and adolescents in Sharjah. And they have the Child Friendly Academy, which is an information platform providing public and community sectors with awareness and knowledge resources. And then we also have here the Internet of Good Things. I love that name. It's not ECD specific, but it does include information and resources on a range of subjects, which now includes COVID-19. And that is from everything from how to speak to your child about COVID-19, excuse me, to child protection issues. Interestingly, also, it's offered free of data charges. So what they've done is they've partnered up with local mobile networks, and people are able to access this without using their data charge. Television is, another internet-free platform, and has been used over many years to engage children in learning in the home environment, and again, providing messages to parents and caregivers. A couple of examples here. Sesame Street's Caring for Each Other series now includes programs addressing COVID-19. And if I have time at the end of this session, I'll circle back and just play that little clip, but I'll keep going for now. And the second example is from Tanzania. It's about a little girl, Akili. She's 4. And when she falls asleep, she has all these animal friends in La La Land, and they go off on adventures. And through these adventures, they learn about developing emergent literacy, numeracy, being kind to each other, and how to handle emotions. It's a program that's broadcast in 5 countries, but it's also online for those countries that are able to give children online access. So they're reaching an even wider audience. So finally, mobile phones. It's estimated, I think, that globally we have over 500 billion people with mobile phones. And so like the social media, even where there are, it's an analog phone, or perhaps there's no internet or very poor internet connection, text messages can be used to share key messages and to provide support to parents and caregivers. So the example here from Colombia, this contactless contact strategy, which is ensuring that children under 5 years in Colombia continue to have enhance their development at home, whilst the early childhood care and education provisions are closed. So educational agents call families at least twice a week. They're monitoring the health and nutrition of the children, and they dialogue with caregivers to promote strengthen care and parenting practices. And actually in Colombia, they launched I'm not going to attempt to pronounce it in Spanish, but My Hands Teach You is the English translation. And they launched that right from the very get-go, from day one, to as soon as early childhood development interventions were closed, to start to target these 1.7 million vulnerable children from birth to 5 and pregnant women, and to ensure that they receive the support and to protect and promote children's continued development. And again, I appreciate Professor Matthias's reference to the private sector here. It's actually something very close to my heart, having spent nearly 20 years myself in the early childhood care and education private sector around the world. And it's particularly important where countries not only encourage, but often rely on the private sector to provide early childhood intervention services. And as we can see here from this data, the percentage of enrolment in early childhood education in private institutions for 2019 show a very high number of children attending these private institutions. So what happens when the private sector services have been closed for so many months? They're not receiving fees. They're not potentially even receiving any financial support. So for example, where a government has a business protection scheme, it doesn't apply to private schools. Well, what will happen is they'll inevitably, their businesses, they're going to have to lay off staff or potentially even close. And why should we care? Well, we should care because if the private sector services close, where we've got such a percentage of enrolment, it's going to leave very big gaps in the supply side of the equation. And when we return to in-person schooling, and those spaces will no longer be there. So we have to ask, will the public sector come in and fill these gaps? So what can we do? How can we support the sector? Well, we can support it through including early childhood care and education services under any small business protection loans or any sort of similar schemes that governments have providing their sector. We can provide direct subsidies or simply ensure that these services stay open as far as possible during lockdowns. Sometimes that happens with limited use by essential workers or frontline workers, places like Canada and Singapore and Australia, for example. In Estonia, the Tallinn city government decided to support all children in private kindergartens and daycares and waive also the municipal garden fee. So during this situation, families, the direct payment to families for each of their child that is attending kindergarten is saving the family an estimated €72 each month. And this is just going to continue until there's full opening of all of the services. So as we prepare, I'm coming to my last two slides now. As we prepare for reopening, we need to be the voices that ensure that early childhood care and education is included in planning for reopening. We need to include that this age group is included in any re-enrollment campaigns. We need to ensure that any accelerated learning programs include this age group, and that there are age-appropriate plans for the hygiene aspect or the health protection aspect. In terms of the how we are prepared for this, we have the global guidance for reopening early childhood education settings, which is a collaborative effort between UNICEF, UNESCO and ourselves at the bank. We're all represented here today. There isn't time in this session for me to speak to each of these points, but I just want to take 3 of them to highlight. One of them is number 2, ensuring that the settings maintain this child-friendly, developmentally appropriate practices. And I feel like a broken record, but I'm going back again to that, ensuring that young children have these opportunities for social engagement, for learning and play, and those very important interactions that Professor Edward was speaking about, this peer-to-peer and adult to child interactions can continue to happen, very important. The second one is the number 3 that I want to highlight, which is the ensuring that staff have training prior to the reopening and support once they are open. In the same way that we need to provide support to parents and caregivers in order for them to be able to support the young children, we need to do the same with our early childhood care and education workforce. We need to support them not only with what they're doing with the children, but themselves. Provide them opportunities for peer-to-peer support. And also, from a very practical level, we need to ensure that the procedures and processes in place are very clear, so that they're not worrying, if there's an incident of COVID that's picked up in the school community, or something happens with the child in the classroom, that the processes are very clear, so that the practitioner understands what to do, and that relieves that stress somewhat from them. And then the last point I'd like to highlight is number 10, which is this planning for reclosures. And I think that during the first stages of the pandemic, there was a lot of linear planning. We will do this during the closures, we'll do this in the short term, and then this in the medium term, and then this in the long term being this vision of everything being open and quote unquote back to normal. But I think what we've discovered is that this is not going to be a linear process. So perhaps we should be planning more for responding to a particular situation, a changing situation. So, are we in full lockdown? Are we open? Are we partially open? Do we have a case within the school? Do we have a case within the class? And so on and so forth. So ensuring that our planning is again, it relieves the stress from those, not all the way from school leaders right the way to the workforce, to people at the chalk face. It relieves the stress, understanding what is it that we need to do under these particular circumstances. So I love this picture, by the way. I really love this child's face. What I want to do is I want to end with just some questions for the community here online, all of us in this early childhood development community, and to continue to talk about amongst ourselves, and to continue to bring to the table to key stakeholders and to decision makers, is how do we ensure that early childhood care and education is included in plans for response to COVID-19? And I'm not just necessarily also talking about care and education there, but perhaps the whole ECD sector. How do we provide quality early childhood care and education in a remote learning context where it's very difficult, the process quality aspect is very difficult to replicate? How do we protect the private sector, and how do we ensure that physical settings are not lost due to the pandemic, so that when we come back to in-person, we don't have huge gaps in the supply side? And then on the flip side, on a more positive note, how can we use this crisis as an opportunity to build our parent caregiver community understanding of and engagement with young children's learning and development beyond this pandemic, which we hope, inshallah, will end very soon. Thank you for your time, and thank you for listening. Shukran jazilan.
Thank you, Louise. Thanks for this presentation. And I think now we will go to the question and answer session. There's a lot of questions, but I will choose some of those. I will give each of the presenter one question, and then I will give you one question so you can answer it, all of you. First question, it will be for Edward. What is the best age for child to learn second language?
Yes, this is a good question. There's no easy answer to this question. However, we see children in bilingual environments where they're exposed to 2 languages in the early years, from birth onwards, being able to acquire both languages in parallel. Now, that's a situation where a child has continuous experience to both languages. More commonly, you have a situation where the child learns their home language and then at a later date learns a second language. The evidence suggests that once the child has a good competence in his home language, usually by 3, then they can also acquire a second language very easily. And in fact, they acquire a second language much more rapidly in the early years than they do later. In the case of my own children, I've had my own children who learned their home language, English, and then we were in an environment where the schools were in another language, and my children picked up the other language when they were in preschool very easily. And by the time they were at school, they were completely fluent in both languages. So I would recommend that parents do not become anxious about exposing their children to a second language in the early years. I think it's very important that they ensure that the child has plenty of language experiences in the home language also, so that they acquire their home language to a full degree, because the child's capacity for learning languages, as I indicated from the brain development work, is particularly adaptive in those early years for learning from language experiences. So I would urge people to expose children to languages early on.
Thank you. Thanks. This question will be for Matthews. Matthews, is there any difference between the learning experience between the children whose they get their early childhood education in education organization or on homeschooling?
Well, I suppose what we know is that the younger the children are, we actually need to connect these 2 environments. And we've heard this from both speakers, from Louise and from Edward as well. The importance of supporting parents and caregivers to actually interact in meaningful ways and in supportive ways with their children is extremely important. At the same time, we also know that stimulating, safe, interesting learning environments outside of the home make a huge contribution. And this is really important because this is where children interact not just with other children in the social environment, but they interact with ideally highly qualified and experienced professionals who can do things like shared sustained thinking and sort of promoting the kind of learning stimulation that children need, and also provide the kind of experience that children are not likely to experience in the home environment. So both go together. And I think in a way, looking sort of extending this, I think the early childhood sector has a lot to contribute to a much larger education discussion here about how we connect educational settings in the compulsory education environment, for instance, with communities and home environments. So I think that is really important. And what we've seen, I suppose, specifically in times of disruption and crisis, is that where countries have established systems and policies and frameworks to make that connection, they were much better prepared to cope with that disruption. And Luisa, I'm grateful that you mentioned the Cero Siempre context in Colombia, because I think it's one of the most exciting examples, actually, to see how you can move from an ambitious policy framework to actual implementation and taking these steps. And the phone program is only one of many sort of ways of keeping connection. And we see that in other countries that have adopted similar integrated frameworks as well. But we need to know where the children are. We need to know how to reach them. And that is infrastructure, that is data, that is, so all this comes together. But
Thank you.
Come back to your original question. I don't think it's either or. It's really making that connection and building an integrated support system for children, families, and communities.
Thank you. Louise, this is for you. What is the professional development program that we need to provide for the educator in the early childhood so they can make this stage more effective on the future of the child?
Can I just clarify, do we mean sort of in a quote unquote normal times, or do we mean in the context of COVID?
No, in the normal time.
Normal times, so-called normal times, right? Thank you, Shukran.
Hopefully we will go back to the normal times soon.
I really, inshallah, hope so. Yes, very sincerely, yeah. Thank you very much for the question. And I've actually spent a lot of time as a school principal, as a KG principal, training paraprofessionals. During that time, I think that there's two tracks, if you like. I've worked with many paraprofessionals who have been extremely capable and have developed their skills and their understanding of how to interact with the child, how to support the child, how to develop their thinking, going back to that shared sustained thinking. This interaction, if we have a teacher who has a high level of understanding of child development and who understands that learning continuum, then you have a teacher or an early childhood professional who is able to create learning under a tree with some sticks. This would be I think my key message. Yeah. It's that the early childhood professional is our key resource. But we also need to have that level of theory, and the understanding of theory needs to be there. And I speak from my own experience. So we've, working with paraprofessionals, there needs to be this underpinning theory that enables the professional to go further than I understand I need to do this with the child, to understanding why they need to do this with the child and what is happening in the child's brain. And so to further and deepen their understanding to enable them to support that child's development. So focusing on it's such a big question. I'm trying to I understand I'm not giving a very concise answer, forgive me. It's a big question, but yes, focusing on the early childhood professional, working with paraprofessionals. These don't have to be trained teachers. They might be people working in the community with the children, working with them, helping them to understand these important interactions and that space of learning that happens in that interaction.
Thank you. If you have each of the presenter have 30 seconds, so they can give a word for the policy maker in the whole world, how to make early childhood more effective for the children and for the student. Edward, you can start. You have 30 minutes.
Okay. I think you mean 30 seconds. Okay.
30 seconds, sorry.
First of all,
sorry, 30 seconds.
We all need to realize that early childhood care and education is part of the infrastructure for all countries who want to succeed in the modern world. If you don't provide this for your children, your country will fall behind in relation to other countries. Now, also, we need to understand that to provide good quality early childhood education and care, we need to train the staff properly and be aware of the importance of the knowledge of child development and how to enhance child development amongst the staff who work with children.
Thank you. Matthias?
Well, I would like to pick up on that. I think we've all seen that early childhood services are part of an essential infrastructure of societies, and I think we need to reinforce that message that it's not just about providing a service for children or their families. It's actually about ensuring that our societies function and work and prosper and thrive. That's really important. I would like to add to that it is not just about the economic and social and structural argument. It's also about the argument of children's rights to education from birth, which is enshrined in international international frameworks, and we need to have that sort of connected to our national policy frameworks much clearer. And I would like to add to that the question, if we think that early childhood services are essential, that they have to be rights-based, that they have to be appropriate to the local and cultural environment, we also have to think about how do we provide these services? Is it appropriate? Is it acceptable for countries to rely on the private sector only to provide an essential public service? And what does that mean for international actors, including, Louise, the World Bank, to support countries to actually enable them to build competent, sustainable, resilient public systems?
Thank you. Louise?
I think I could probably do it in less than 30 seconds and just say, don't forget us. But to expand on that, I think that I would say, and have said, very much appreciate the national strategies, very much appreciate the commitments to early childhood care and education, the national goals that are being put in place, the importance being placed on this age group. But please, now we also need the financial commitments alongside that. We need yes.
Yeah.
We need matching financial commitments to the rhetoric, please. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Louise. I would like to thank our presenter, our expert for their paper. And now I think I will leave the floor to Dr. Asia to go to the second session. Usually we have 5 minutes break in the schedule, but I think we can go directly to the second session so we can catch up the time. Dr. Asia, you can start.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, esteemed presenters and guests, and welcome to our second session entitled The Future of Early Childhood Care and Education and Best Practices. My name is Dr. Asia Foster, and I'll be the moderator for this session. Our first speaker is Dr. Hessa Al-Kaabi, who is the head of the Executive Affairs Office at the Abu Dhabi Early Childhood Authority. In her current role, Dr. Hessa provides oversight for the monitoring and implementation of the authority's priorities in coordination with sectors and strategic partners. Dr. Hessa will be discussing national best practice and the Abu Dhabi Early Childhood Strategy. Dr. Hessa, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Asia. In the beginning, السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. حابة أشكركم ويسعدني التواجد في هذا اللقاء مع جميع الحضور. أشكر معالي الدكتور حسين الحمادي وجميع المنظمين والمشاركين والخبراء على جهودهم الحثيثة في نشر الخبرات والمعرفة في قطاع الطفولة المبكرة. حابة اليوم أتكلم معاكم على 3 محاور رئيسية. برجع أكد على أهمية الطفولة المبكرة، وبعدين بتكلم على موضوع استراتيجية هيئة الطفولة المبكرة، ومن عقب إن شاء الله بذكر استراتيجية الرعاية والتعليم المبكرين. Can everyone see my slides?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
بنتكلم again عن أهمية الطفولة المبكرة، أو شو تعريفنا نحن كهيئة أبو ظبي للطفولة المبكرة لهذه المرحلة. هي المرحلة التي تشمل الأطفال من قبل الحمل وحتى سن 8 سنوات. تشمل مجالات تنمية الطفولة المبكرة 4 مجالات رئيسية مركزة على التنمية البدنية للطفل، التنمية الإدراكية للطفل، التنمية اللغوية للطفل، والتنمية الاجتماعية والعاطفية كذلك. نحن مثل ما قالوا الخبراء اللي قبلي أن هذه السنوات ال8 هي من أهم السنوات التي يمر بها الإنسان، ويكتمل نمو الدماغ في سن 3 سنوات بنسبة 75%، وفي سن 6 سنوات بنسبة 90%، وفي سن 8 سنوات ل9 سنوات يكون الطفل شكل قيمه الأساسية في الحياة ومبادئه الرئيسية، وشكلت أهم مقومات شخصيته وملامحها. نحن في خلال السنوات اللي بعد هاي 9 سنوات أو 8 سنوات نتم نشتغل على 10% فقط. فهذه المرحلة مثل ما قالوا مهمة علمياً، أثبت أهميتها. اقتصادياً طبعاً الخبراء اللي قبلي راووا دراسات مختلفة. نحن هني نسترشد بالبروفيسور جيمس هيكمان الحاصل على جائزة نوبل في هذه الدراسة اللي أكدت أن العائد الاستثماري على الطفل في هذه المرحلة يكون في بعض الدول من 2 إلى 7 مرات يعود على الاقتصاد للدول اللي تركز على مرحلة الطفولة المبكرة. كيف ممكن أن نحن نأثر في البرامج ذات الجودة العالية على الأطفال؟ شو بنوصل له من حيث التعليم؟ إذا تعرض الطفل لبرامج ذات جودة عالية بيكون عندنا يرتفع معدل الذكاء بأكثر من 11 نقطة، تزيد احتمالية التخرج من المدرسة الثانوية أكثر من 33%، تقل احتمالية أن هذا الطفل يتعرض أو يطلب التعليم خاص بنسبة 50%. صحياً الأطفال اللي يمرون ببرامج ذات جودة عالية تنخفض احتمالية خطر الإصابة بأمراض مزمنة بنسبة من 20 إلى 50%، وأيضاً تنخفض خطر الإصابة بالسمنة عندهم بمعدل 2، وتقل احتمالية تعرضهم لمشاكل مرتبطة بالمخدرات أو الكحول بنسبة 50%. لو نعكس هذا على المجتمع بيستوي عنده مجتمع إنتاجيته في العمل عالية، لأن احتمالية حصول هؤلاء الأطفال مستقبلاً على وظيفة تتطلب مهارات تزيد معدل 2، ويزيد متوسط دخل هؤلاء الأطفال بنسبة أكثر عن غيرهم بنسبة 30%. مجتمعنا بعد ما نوصل لبرامج ذات جودة عالية بيقل فيه الاعتماد على نظام رعاية الطفل، وأيضاً تنخفض فيه معدل التعرض للحالات الإجرامية. بننتقل الحين بعد ما ذكرنا أهمية الطفولة المبكرة كقطاع بصورة مختصرة، بنتكلم عن هيئة أبو ظبي للطفولة المبكرة. أنشئت هيئة أبو ظبي للطفولة المبكرة في يوليو 2019. قبل الهيئة كانت هناك لجنة معنية بدراسة الوضع الحالي للطفولة المبكرة في إمارة أبو ظبي. درست اللجنة أولاً مؤشرات الأطفال الرئيسية في الإمارة، وبعدين درست بالمرحلة الثانية المنظومة المحيطة بهذه اللي هي الإيكو سيستم المحيط بالأطفال في إمارة أبو ظبي، وتم تحديد الاستراتيجية من خلالها. نحن كهيئة أبو ظبي للطفولة المبكرة نركز على هذا القطاع ونلتزم بأعلى المعايير ونضع الطفل في محور اهتماماتنا. هدفنا كهيئة أن نحن نعمل مع جميع الشركاء الاستراتيجيين سواء في القطاع الحكومي المحلي والاتحادي، في القطاع الخاص والقطاع الثالث، وركز على أن جميع الأطفال في أبو ظبي أن يكون تركيزنا على العمل على ازدهارهم وتنميتهم. محاورنا الرئيسية كهيئة إحنا نعمل على التمكين من خلال تعزيز قدرات شركائنا لدعم التنمية الشاملة للطفل. نعمل على أيضاً صناعة السياسات، نعمل على مراجعة السياسات الحالية في المجالات المختلفة، وضع القوانين والتشريعات بالتنسيق مع الجهات المعنية. نحن أيضاً مركز معرفي لأن عندنا عدد من البحوث والبيانات والأدلة وأنظمة معنية بالبيانات الخاصة بقطاع الطفولة المبكرة، وندعم من خلال هذه البحوث والبيانات والأدلة صناع القرارات في إمارة أبو ظبي وأيضاً على المستوى الاتحادي. مجتمعياً نعمل على التأثير في المجتمع إن شاء الله بطريقة تفكير المجتمع فيما يعنى بشؤون الأطفال الصغار وتلبية احتياجاتهم. رؤيتنا كهيئة، رؤية هيئة أبو ظبي للطفولة المبكرة أن يتمتع كل طفل صغير بالصحة والعافية ويتحلى بالثقة بالنفس، وأن يكون محباً للاطلاع وقادر على التعلم وتنمية قيم متينة في بيئة آمنة وداعمة للأسرة في أبو ظبي. طبعا اللي يميز الرؤية عندنا نحن من خلال الدراسات وحتى مقارنتها مع الفيجنز في دول أخرى، أن نحن طلعت عندنا تنمية قيم متينة كعامل أساسي يجب أن يضاف في هذه الرؤية، من خلال طبعا الريسيرش اللي سويناه مع الأهالي ومع مقدمين رعاية ومع حتى أطفال تم تضمينهم في الدراسات الاستباقية لوضع هذه الرؤية. مجالات تركيزنا نركز على 4 قطاعات رئيسية. نركز على قطاع الصحة والتغذية، قطاع الدعم الأسري، قطاع حماية الطفل، والرعاية والتعليم المبكرة. نستهدف فئات مختلفة، أهمها طبعاً فئة الأطفال من عمر 0 إلى 8 سنوات، أولياء الأمور ومقدمي الرعاية والأسر، المجتمع، صانعو السياسات والجهات الحكومية، العاملون والمتخصصون في مجال الطفولة المبكرة، القطاع الخاص نفس ما قلنا، والمنظمات الغير حكومية، وأيضاً مؤسسات التعليم العالي. يمكن أشرح لكم شوية استراتيجيتنا في تنمية قطاع الطفولة المبكرة، هي إن شاء الله ل 15 سنة القادمة ل 2035. تكلمنا عن الرؤية، تكلمنا عن مجالات التركيز. طبعاً وضعت هذه الاستراتيجية تشمل جميع الأطفال باختلاف جنسياتهم وأيضاً قدراتهم واحتياجاتهم الفردية. أخذنا في عين الاعتبار أن نبني على البنية التحتية الموجودة حالياً، وأيضاً أن نراعي وجود البحوث والدراسات في جميع المبادرات والمشاريع اللي أطلقناها، ودائماً يكون عندنا دعم للتحسين المستمر ومراقبة الجودة وتعزيزها. أهم شيء عندي في هالسلايد حابة أخذكم أو أكلمكم عنه هي الغايات. غاياتنا إحنا عندنا 3 غايات رئيسية في استراتيجية الطفولة المبكرة. الغايتين الأولى والثانية تركزان على الطفل، والغاية الثالثة تركز على البيئة المحيطة فيه. أولاً أن يكون لدى جميع الأطفال ما يلزم من أساسيات للتمتع بصحة بدنية جيدة وللتنمية الاجتماعية والعاطفية والتعليم المبكر، وأن يعيش جميع الأطفال في بيئة مستقرة وآمنة، وأن يكونوا في مأمن من أي أذى وخطر. اسمحوا لي بس لأن الليت اللي عندي سنسر فلازم أتحرك عشان يشتغل. أوكي. والغاية الثالثة أن يتحلى اللي هي تركز على أولياء الأمور، أن يتحلى أولياء الأمور بالثقة في النفس ويكون لديهم القدرة لدعم التنمية الشاملة لأطفالهم والعمل على رفاهيتهم. احنا هني تكلمنا ان عندنا في برامج متعددة القطاعات، طبعا على اساس القطاعات الرئيسية اللي نحن نشتغل عليها. عندنا 7 برامج رئيسية بكلمكم عنها في السلايد الجاي ان شاء الله. هذه البرامج الرئيسية، أول برنامجين يعنوا في الطفل والأهل، وباقي البرامج ال5 تعنى في المنظومة المحيطة بالطفل. البرنامج الأول وهو ذو أهمية، تعزيز نظام حماية الطفل من الوقاية إلى إعادة التأهيل. حالياً نحن كهيئة عملنا مع الشركاء الرئيسيين، وضعنا إطار متكامل، إطار عمل لحماية الطفل وإدارة حالات حماية الطفل، وأيضاً عملنا على تدريب خريجين ضباط حماية بناء على قانون وديمة مع شركائنا الرئيسيين الاتحاديين وزارة تنمية المجتمع والمحليين من خلال دائرة القضاء. عملنا أيضاً على تعزيز برامج الدعم الأسري، هذه شوية باخذكم فيها بعدين ان ديتيلز، بس حالياً بقول لكم أن نحن اشتغلنا على استراتيجيتين مهمات. استراتيجية تعنى بمراجعة جميع الموارد والخدمات المقدمة للأطفال في إمارة أبو ظبي، وحالياً هاي الاستراتيجية في قيد المناقشة والاعتماد مع الشركاء الرئيسيين. وعندنا استراتيجية ثانية ركزت على الرعاية والتعليم المبكرين، وهاي هي الاستراتيجية اللي بكلمكم عنها بصورة مختصرة بعدين إن شاء الله. أنشأنا منظومة لتطوير السياسات والتشريعات المتعلقة بتنمية الطفولة المبكرة. رقم 3، نحن حالياً عندنا دليل إرشادي تستدل به شركائنا الرئيسيين في إمارة أبو ظبي، في حال حبوا يحطون أي سياسة متعلقة بالطفولة المبكرة يرجعون لهذا الدليل ويتبعون الخطوات اللي لازم يأخذونها ويحطونها في عين الاعتبار في تطوير أي سياسة تعنى بالطفولة المبكرة. عملنا مع شركائنا المحليين والاتحاديين على مراجعة القوانين، بعض السياسات فيما يعنى بالصحة، فيما يعنى بسن المساءلة القانونية، فيما يعنى حتى بإجازات الوالدين وإجازات الأمهات الحاضنات، أو خلينا نقول الأمهات اللي هم مش الأمهات البيولوجيات أو الآباء البيولوجيين للأطفال اللي تم احتضانهم. رقم 4، إعداد استراتيجية شاملة لرأس المال البشري. حاليا نحن عندنا طورنا استراتيجية كاملة لرأس المال البشري في قطاع تنمية الطفولة المبكرة في أبو ظبي. حددنا تقريبا 100 وظيفة تساهم بصورة مباشرة في تنمية الطفولة، أو حددنا 45 من هذه الوظائف على أساس أن نحن نشتغل على جميع المنظومة اللي موجودة، طريقة تأهيلهم، طريقة ترخيصهم، طريقة وضعهم، طريقة حتى البروفيشنال ديفلوبمنت لما يكونون موجودين في مجال العمل. بنركز السنة الجاية تقريبا على 45 وظيفة من 100 وظيفة، وبتكون هذه هي الوظائف ذات الأولوية إن شاء الله. مع شركائنا الرئيسيين بنقدر أن احنا نعزز هذه التوب برايورتيز من الوظائف. رقم 5، إنشاء منظومة ومنصات لقيادة التميز حاليا والابتكار. حاليا في خلال السنة اللي طافت أطلقنا برنامج، خلينا نتكلم شوي عن الابتكار، اسميناه برنامج أنجال زي. وبرنامج أنجال زي كان هو في برنامج تجريبي في أول سنة. استقطبنا شركات ناشئة، عطيناها تحديات تواجه إمارة أبو ظبي في مجال الطفولة المبكرة. تقريبا 5 منهم كملوا معنا بعد الفلتريشن أو التصنيف، أو ساعدونا فعلا في البانديميك. وحابة أقول لكم أن نحن تشاركنا معاهم في وضع تدريب أو ورشات تدريبية للوالدين وللمعلمين حتى مقدمي الرعاية في دور الحضانة، وللإداريين والمدراء وللممرضين في دور الحضانة في إمارة أبو ظبي، وحتى في الإمارات الأخرى. ورش العمل اللي قدمت للوالدين تقريبا 128 ورشة، تم حضور تقريبا 29,000 من الوالدين. فيما يعنى بالمعلمين والإداريين والمدراء، عندنا كانوا معلمين تقريبا 13,500 معلم شاركوا في هذه الدورات التدريبية، وللإداريين تقريبا 2000 مدير تنفيذي أو مدير من الحضانات اللي تحت من جميع الإمارات. نفس ما قلنا تقريبا عندنا 350 ممرضة أيضا شاركوا، وكان هذه التدريبات للحضانات تساعدهم على الإجراءات الاحترازية اللي لازم يراعونها عند فتح الحضانات بعد إن شاء الله كان قرار وزارة التربية والتعليم ودائرة التعليم والمعرفة. هذا فيما يعنى بالابتكار. فيما يعنى بالمنصة الأنظمة والبيانات، عندنا منظومة شاملة تعنى بجمع البيانات الخاصة بالطفولة المبكرة في إمارة أبو ظبي. حالياً عملنا على الربط مع شركائنا الرئيسيين، في عندنا نتعاون مع القضاء والصحة ومؤسسة زايد العليا لأصحاب الهمم، وأيضاً مع التعليم العالي، وزارة التعليم العالي ودائرة المعرفة. وعندنا تقريباً إحنا حالياً حطينا used cases أو حالات حابين ندرسها ببيانات مزودة من شركائنا الرئيسيين. تقريبا بنركز على 21 حالة من هذه اليوز كيسز إن شاء الله، أو بتم دراستها ومشاركة شركائنا الرئيسيين بالمخرجات بإذن الله في خلال السنة القادمة. البرنامج السادس يتكلم عن إعداد منظومة شاملة للبحوث والدراسات. حاليا نعمل على تفعيل هذا البرنامج. خلال البانديميك أو الجائحة قمنا بدراسة، هاي الدراسة هي طويلة الأمد، خلصنا من المرحلة الأولى فيها، ولدراسة تأثير الكوفيد 19 على الأطفال في إمارة أبو ظبي، وبيكون فيها إن شاء الله ويف ثاني بيتم إطلاقه قريباً، ونزود بهاي المخرجات بشركائنا الرئيسيين على المستوى الاتحادي والمحلي أيضاً، لأنها تثري المدخلات عند إعداد الاستراتيجيات أو السياسات القادمة. في النهاية نتكلم عن تطوير استراتيجية للمشاركة العامة. هذه الاستراتيجية نحن نتكلم عن العمل على تغيير ثقافة نفس ما قلنا، نحاول أن نرفع الوعي ونضع خطة شاملة للاتصال والمشاركة العامة لدعم التنفيذ الفعال لاستراتيجية تنمية الطفولة المبكرة في إمارة أبو ظبي. وتركيزنا دائما في المشاركة العامة على نفس ما قلت تغيير السلوكيات وليس فقط المواد الإعلامية. من هذه البرامج السبعة بركز على برنامج نفس ما قلت لكم قبل، اللي هو تعزيز برامج الدعم الأسري ومقدمي الرعاية. وحابة أكلمكم بصورة تفصيلية عن برنامج عندنا يسمى اللي هي استراتيجية نظام الرعاية والتعليم. قبل لا نبدأ نتكلم عن هاي الاستراتيجية، نحن في هيئة أبو ظبي للطفولة المبكرة حبينا نعرف شو يعني نظام الرعاية والتعليم. نظام الرعاية والتعليم هو عبارة عن نظام يؤدي إلى تمكين النماء الاجتماعي والعاطفي والإدراكي والجسدي للطفل منذ الحمل وحتى سن 8 سنوات. كيف بيتم هذا؟ عبر إرساء أسس واسعة للتعليم والتعلم والصحة على مدى حياة الطفل. من خلال وضع الأنشطة والسياسات والمعايير اللي تتناسب مع سياقنا المحلي في إمارة أبو ظبي، والتي أيضاً تمكن الوالدين أنهم هم يوفرون البيئة التشجيعية، وبعد النظام اللي هو الحكومي أو حتى الشركات الأخرى من توفير بنية تحتية عالية الجودة، ونقدر نقول كفاءات عالية من مقدمي الرعاية المؤهلين لتعزيز تنمية الطفل في مرحلة نفس ما قلنا من 0 إلى 8 سنوات. ماذا نقصد بالرعاية والتعليم؟ نحن ما نقصد أن نفس ما قالوا الخبراء اللي قبلي، التعليم والرعاية ليست فقط في دور الحضانة، ولا تقتصر أيضاً على رياض الأطفال والمدارس. الطفل اليوم يتعلم في التعليم المنزلي، فأهمية وضع أطر تحسينية لهذا التعليم. المربيات، يقضي الأطفال عندنا تقريباً 70% من وقتهم مع المربيات لو ما كانوا يتعاملون مع النظام التعليمي. يعني لما تشوف منو الأشخاص اللي يتعامل معاهم الطفل في حياته غير المدرسين، يكون 70% من وقته مع مربيات الأطفال. نقدر نتكلم عن البرامج الصيفية واللامنهجية اللي توفرها المؤسسات القطاع الخاص وغيرها للأطفال في الإمارة. نتكلم أيضاً عن الخدمات الترفيهية اللي توفرها مثلاً هيئة السياحة والثقافة من متاحف، مراكز مجتمعية، ساحات اللعب اللي تتوفرها البلديات عندنا أيضاً في إمارة أبو ظبي. عامل أساسي حالياً هي الخدمات الافتراضية والابليكيشنز والتقنيات التعليمية اللي موجودة عندنا، وهي يعني عامل لا يستهان فيه في تربية الطفل. فنحن وبعد في تركيز شامل على تعليم الأطفال من أصحاب الهمم. حاولنا نحن دائما في جميع مخرجات هذه الخطة أن نحن نشملهم. شو كانت منهجيتنا في وضع هذه الاستراتيجية؟ عندنا مبادئ توجيهية، أهمها هي نعمل على تحسين الجودة وتوسيع نطاق الوصول للخدمات جميع المستفيدين منها في إمارة أبو ظبي بجميع الفئات. يجب أن تكون جميع البرامج تدعم الاستثمار في خدمات الرعاية والتعليم في مرحلة الطفولة المبكرة. أيضاً تعزز تحسين البنية التحتية والتعاون وعوامل التمكين الرئيسية. وبعدين أن دائماً يكون عندنا قياس لهذه الخدمات المتوفرة ودعمها لزيادة الإقبال عليها، لأن نحن في النهاية نركز على الاستمرارية ليس فقط البدء. بعطيكم مختصر سناب شوت على الاستراتيجية هذه. شو رؤيتنا في استراتيجية الرعاية، التعليم والرعاية المبكرة؟ الرؤية هي تمكين جميع الأطفال في إمارة أبو ظبي من خوض تجارب مثيرة من خلال برامج رعاية وتعليم عالية الجودة في مرحلة الطفولة المبكرة، بحيث تدعم هذه البرامج تنمية القيم نفس ما قلنا قبل والكفاءات، وتضع أساساً للتعلم مدى الحياة والفرح. ويمكن كلمة الفرح مفقودة في وايد من الرؤى فيما يعنى بالأطفال، فإحنا حسينا أن الانجويمنت لازم تكون موجودة في هاي المرحلة لجميع الأطفال. الغايات الرئيسية، عندنا 3 غايات رئيسية تحت هذه الاستراتيجية. يجب أن يشعر جميع الأطفال الصغار بالتقدير والاحترام، ويشعرون بالأمان والتشجيع على أنهم يتطوروا على أقصى حدود إمكاناتهم الفردية. الغاية الثانية توفير مجموعة من البيئات والخبرات لتحفيز التطور الأمثل والرفاهية لجميع الأطفال الصغار وأولياء أمورهم. الغاية الثالثة إيجاد نظام منسق للرعاية والتعليم في مرحلة الطفولة المبكرة، مدعوم بالسياسات ومدعوم بالأنظمة، وأيضاً وجود رقابة قوية لتعزيز إنشاء الخدمات وتنمية جودتها ودعم الاستدامة لهذه الخدمات. بنتكلم عن أهداف رئيسية. عندنا هدفين رئيسيين، والأهداف هني يعني اللي هي بتكون مور أكشنبل حقنا نتخذ فيها إجراءات أو نحط تحتها برامج ومشاريع دايركتلي تحت هذه الأهداف. هدفين رئيسيين، أول هدف هو ضمان إمكانية حصول جميع الأطفال على خدمات الرعاية والتعليم العالية الجودة في مرحلة الطفولة. أول شيء حصولهم على الخدمات، ثاني شيء وضع منظومة لتمكين صنع السياسات وتقديم الخدمات. يعني هذيل الاثنين مثل اللي مع بعض يدا بيد، ما نقدر نستغنى عن واحدة من هذه الأهداف، لأنهم دائما يرجعون لبعض. في 3 مبادرات رئيسية تحت الهدف الأول. بنتكلم عن إنشاء قطاع دور حضانة عالي الجودة ومستدام. نحن عندنا في إمارة أبو ظبي تقريباً نشكل الأطفال في دور الحضانة 10% فقط، والأغلبية يعني بيكونون داخل من ضمن التعليم المنزلي. لذلك وجب وضع خطة رئيسية لقطاع دور الحضانة لتحسين أيضاً قدرة القطاع على خدمة أطفال الهمم. تقريباً تحت كل مبادرة هنالك 6 مشاريع، ولكن أنا بعطيكم بس نبذة عن نبذة مختصرة أو أمثلة عن كل المشاريع اللي تحت المبادرات هذه. نفس ما قلت في أول مبادرة بيكون هناك خطة رئيسية لقطاع دور الحضانة، وبنعمل على تحسين قدرة القطاع على خدمة أطفال الهمم. لما نتكلم عن المبادرة الثانية اللي هي تحسين جودة خدمات الرعاية والتعليم في المدارس وإمكانية الوصول إليها، نحن هنا نتكلم عن توسيع نطاق من ضمن الأمثلة للمشاريع اللي تحتها توسيع نطاق استخدام التقنيات التعليمية، ووضع مبادرة تركز على الانتقال من دار الحضانة إلى المدرسة. ثالثاً عندنا مبادرة توسيع نطاق خدمات الرعاية والتعليم خارج نطاق دور الحضانة والمدارس. فنحن هني نقول توسيع نطاق الخدمات الرعاية بالتركيز على المرافق الأخرى مثل المتاحف، المكتبات، الحدائق، ساحات اللعب، والخدمات المقدمة للوالدين كذلك. بنتكلم عن الهدف الثاني، ماذا نقصد بوضع منظومة فاعلة لتمكين صنع السياسات وتقديم الخدمات والتنفيذ بشكل فعال. من أهم المبادرات تحت الثلاثة، أولاً وضع الأنظمة والإجراءات لزيادة مستوى الجودة. هني نتكلم عن وضع نهج لدراسة التكلفة ومراقبة جودة الخدمات التعليمية بحيث أنه يسهل الوصول إليها. ثاني شيء وضع خطة للأبحاث في مجال الرعاية والتعليم والتركيز على التعليم المنزلي وجودته. بنتكلم عن ثاني نقطة هي تطوير كفاءة العاملين في مجال الرعاية. هني نقول بشكل عام نعمل على وضع نظام متكامل لتطوير كفاءة العاملين في مجال الرعاية والتعليم، وبشكل خاص الكفاءات التي تساعد في الاهتمام بالأطفال أصحاب الهمم. أخيراً نتكلم عن تحسين التوعية والمشاركة في مجال الرعاية والتعليم في مرحلة الطفولة المبكرة. هني نحن نتكلم عن تطوير آلية متكاملة لمشاركة القطاعات المختلفة، القطاع الخاص، القطاع الثالث، والقطاع الحكومي، وأيضاً القطاعات العالمية بالتواصل مع الشركاء العالميين لنشر المعلومات المتعلقة بالرعاية والتعليم المبكرين لجميع المستفيدين منها، سواء من والدين، سواء من مجتمع، سواء من باحثين وخبراء. خطة هذه الاستراتيجية هي 5 سنوات، يوجد تحت 36 مشروع يتم حالياً مناقشتها وقيد الاعتماد مع شركائنا الرئيسيين. نفس ما قلنا معنا وزارة التربية والتعليم، دائرة المعرفة والتعليم، دائرة الصحة، دائرة الثقافة والسياحة كأهم شركاء رئيسيين في تنفيذ هذه الخطة.
You have 2 minutes remaining.
That's all right, I'm almost done. شو اللي نتطلع له لما تنفذ جميع هذه الخطط الاستراتيجية؟ نتكلم عن 2035. هناك خصائص نحن نتطلع إلى توفرها لدى الأطفال في سن 8 سنوات في إمارة أبو ظبي. نتطلع أن هذا الطفل يكون صحياً، بس لأن عندي البار هني، تغذيته سليمة، يكون آمن عاطفياً، يكون صحي بدنياً. من ناحية الدعم الأسري، أن هذا الطفل يكون يوجه توجيهه أساسه القيم المتينة، بيئته العائلية مستقرة وآمنة. من ناحية حماية الطفل يجب أن يكون الطفل هذا يحس بالأمان بعيد عن الأذى والخطر. من ناحية التعليم والرعاية، هذا الطفل يجب أن ينشأ ليكون طفل اجتماعي، طفل مبدع، طفل ذو كفاءة دراسية. وهذه التطلعات هي تنطبق على جميع الأطفال اللي نحن بنركز عليهم بناء على قدراتهم الذاتية والفردية. وإن شاء الله نفس ما قال سيدي سمو الشيخ محمد بن زايد في 2050 بيكونون هذه الأطفال هم الآباء اللي بنحتفل معاهم بتصدير آخر برميل نفط بإذن الله. في حال حد حاب يطلع أكثر على البرامج اللي موجودة عندنا في هيئة الطفولة المبكرة، هذه وسائل الاطلاع، عندنا الموقع وعندنا سوشيال ميديا أكاونتس، وإن شاء الله نطلع إلى أسئلتكم في المرحلة الجاية من الجلسة. شكرا جزيلا.
Thank you, Dr. Hessa, for enlightening us on the enhancements to early childhood in Abu Dhabi, and we look forward to the fruitful output of the SEA. Our next speaker is Dr. Yoshi Kadal, a specialist of early childhood care and education at the UNESCO Regional Bureau for West Africa. In her current role, Dr. Yoshi is responsible for education for living together, education for sustainable development, education in emergency situations, and early childhood care and education. The changing landscapes of ECCE and international trends and insights before you in the time before and in the time of COVID-19. Dr. Yoshi, I yield to you.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much for this kind invitation to participate in this very important seminar. And I would like to extend my gratitude to RECEP for this leadership in really promoting the visibility and the importance of early childhood in this difficult time that we are going through. So salam alaikum and good morning and good afternoon, wherever you are. As Dr. Foster said, my presentation will be focused on, oops, it doesn't change. Excuse me, I'm just gonna try. Maybe if I, it's a little bit frozen, excuse me.
What's wrong, Miss? You see?
I cannot flip the slides.
Okay, can you just click on re-preview again or reshare? Just turn off the share again and
okay.
Reshare it again. Maybe
excuse me, I haven't been very savvy in terms of technology yet.
No worries.
So I'm going to try to share again. Okay, share. Okay, so let me see if it works. No, it doesn't work on my side. I cannot flip.
You can click on the keyboard arrows.
Yes,
maybe
that's what I'm doing.
It's not working. Okay, try with the mouse. If not working, I will start clicking from my side.
Okay, right.
Okay.
The arrows don't work, unfortunately.
Okay, I will open it from my side.
Mm-hmm.
Just a second, please.
Yes. Excuse me. Perhaps while waiting for this technological problem to be fixed, I would like to just get started with my presentation. So it's going to be focused on the policy trends in early childhood care and education. So I'm hoping that this information would help us understand a little bit more about the kinds of responses that we have been seeing in this difficult time of COVID to tackle the challenges at different levels of society, and hopefully also to have some sources of exploring what are the possible options that we could take by looking at different countries, different regions, what they have been doing, how they have been constructing early childhood care and education so far. In terms of the policy trends, what I like to share with you would be a few points in terms of access, legal provision, teachers, integration and coordination, and financing. And then I'd like to go to some information about the policy responses that we have been seeing in some internationally documented sources, and then some words of conclusion. Okay, so I'd like to show you the slide about the access trends that we see in the world and by region. In terms of the access rate, as you can imagine, the rate is increasing and worldwide. In 2000, in the year 2000, we had seen the gross enrollment rate for pre-primary education being 34%, but then in 2018, we have 52%. So there has been a 20 percent points increase in terms of world average. Nevertheless, there is differences in terms of different world regions. So for example, if you look at the Central and South Asia, we have 26% of this rate. Northern Africa and Western Asia, we have 32% of GER in pre-primary education. As we go up to the higher level of enrollment rate, we have Eastern and Southeastern Asia, which shows 82% in 2018. And the upper, the highest rate we can see in Europe and Northern America, which is 86%. So,
excuse me, Ms.
yes.
just for 1 second. Can you just go out from the preview position and just be on the PowerPoint?
Preview position.
Yes. Turn off
turn off my camera.
No, not your camera. Slide position. Slide preview.
Slide preview.
Just click escape on the keyboard.
Escape. It doesn't work.
It doesn't work. Also, okay. I will make you to stop share again. Just 1 second.
I can stop sharing.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
And share it again, because I didn't find your presentation with in the emails.
So let me share again. Share screen.
Yes.
Share screen. Okay.
Still stuck in this one?
Yes, I think so. I'm very sorry about this.
Okay, when you click on share screen, you choose entire screen or just presentation screen? Okay, no worries. No worries. Continue. Just continue. No worries.
I'm very sorry about this.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Technological problem. So may I go into continue with the access issue? There is, as I have said, regional differences in terms of access, but also, of course, as you all know, there are important differences of access among different groups of populations. So I wanted to show you the slide which shows the regional trends in terms of inequalities that exist, in terms of wealth and in terms of location. For example, in terms of wealth, in Northern Africa and Western Asia, the poorest are accessing 5% only of pre-primary education, whereas the richest children are accessing 37%. So there's a huge difference. Even in regions such as Europe and North America, the poorest are accessing 36%, whereas the richest are accessing 70%. In terms of the differences of location, the rural children are usually disadvantaged vis-a-vis the urban children. So when you look at the Northern Africa and Western Asia, the children in rural areas are accessing 9% only of pre-primary education, whereas in urban areas, they are accessing 27%. So let me turn to some information about the trends that we see in terms of legal provision in early childhood. So here I'd like to speak about the free and compulsory legal provision that might exist in different countries or different regions even. So I wanted to highlight the slide which shows a picture of where different regions are in terms of adopting free pre-primary education. It's the data from 2019. So if you look at, for example, the Arab states, there are 16 countries in total, but only one country, which is Algeria, has adopted free pre-primary education. If we look at, for example, Africa, we have in total 47 countries, of which 6 countries have adopted free pre-primary education in their legal policies. If you look at, for example, Europe and North America, we see that more than 50% of the countries have adopted the free pre-primary education. So there are differences still in terms of adopting this legal provision of free pre-primary education. Another legal provision that I like to highlight is about compulsory, providing compulsory pre-primary education. So if you look at the regional trends, there is still considerable differences as well. If we look at the Arab states, there is no country in this region which have adopted compulsory pre-primary education. Whereas, for example, if you look at Latin American and Caribbean countries, we have 18 countries that have adopted compulsory pre-primary education versus 15 countries which have not. So there is differences there as well. In terms of the teacher issues, I wanted to talk about the qualifications that are required to become pre-primary teachers. So because as you know, one of the important factors that are affecting quality of services is the qualification level of the educators. So 75% of the OECD countries require bachelor's degrees to become pre-primary educators, and some countries are requiring master's degree. If you look at the lower income countries, oftentimes they require only high school completion. So, for example, Yemen, Albania, Kyrgyz Republic, Belize, Jamaica. There are a number of countries that have a very quite a low requirement to become early childhood educators, which does have an implication on what kind of quality we would be getting in the early childhood services. If we look at the Southeast Asia and also some of the Latin American countries, the trend is now to require post-secondary or tertiary education level as a minimum required qualification. In terms of the level of the trained educators across different levels, if we compare the pre-primary teachers against primary and lower secondary education teachers, we see in the regional trends from the existing data that the pre-primary teachers are the least prepared or least trained vis-a-vis other levels of education. So if we look at, for example, the Northern Africa and Western African region, the difference is small, but then still in pre-primary education teachers, 82% are qualified and have reached minimum training according to the national standards, whereas in lower secondary teachers, there is 86%. If we go into sub-Saharan Africa, for example, the pre-primary teachers are trained to this level about 49% compared to 64% for lower secondary teachers. So there is need for more effort to provide for pre-service education and training for early childhood teachers. Now I wanted to talk about some trends in terms of integration and coordination, or the governance for early childhood care and education. And as you know, you would find sort of different ways or different areas with which early childhood care and education are associated with. If you talk about the vertical coordination or integration, we think about the linkages between, for example, 0 to 3 services or 3 to 6 services. Also the linkages with the primary school. And that, as emphasized by some of the previous speakers, it's important to integrate early childhood care and education as an integral part of education sector planning and also development of response plans within education, for example. If we talk about sort of the horizontal coordination, which means sort of the different sectors that would be concerned with the well-being and learning and protection of young children, which all have implications for the child development. So we talk about coordination between health, nutrition, social protection, and then also in terms of linkages, for example, with the employment policies or leave policies, parental leave policies. So I wanted to highlight some of the trends in terms of this governance issues. As I looked at the information from Eurydice, which covers the countries in Europe, and they have done a great publication in 2019 about these different trends. So if you look at the information, early childhood care and education are for the whole group age group, are integrated within education. There is Luxembourg, Lithuania, Malta, Slovenia, Sweden, Norway, Serbia. There are quite a few numbers which have decided to integrate all the responsibilities under education. We have a couple of examples that have integrated within an authority other than education, which we can see in terms of in Denmark and Germany, for example. But then still the majority or more the greater number of types of governance for early childhood care and education rests with a split system where one agency or authority takes care of 0 to 3 and then another one 3 to 6 typically. So in terms of sort of the linkages with other sectoral policies, I wanted to highlight that according to the information from a study in 2015, there is more and more countries that are adopting multi-sectoral policies for early childhood development. And in the year 2000, there were only 7 countries which have adopted multi-sectoral policies. But then in 2014, 68 countries have been documented to have adopted such policies. I like to refer to you, for example, if you're interested, to look at an example that's included in the UNESCO's Global Monitoring Report, which came out this year, with a focus on inclusion. So there is an example of a successful comprehensive early childhood development program, which is called Chile, the Crece Contigo. Chile grows with you. Some of you might be familiar with this program, but it's part of an integrated sort of social protection policies, just taking care of prenatal period until the age of 4, with the involvement and coordination between health and education and protection sectors. I think this would be an interesting case to look at. As I have been also requested to touch upon sort of the relevance of leave policies, parental leave policies in vis-a-vis early child care and education. I'd like to say a few words about what we can see in the available international information. So again, this information comes from sort of the international network for leave policies and research, which has researchers coming from 45 countries, mainly from Europe, but then also from other parts of the world. This network has been documenting the changes in leave policies and also pointing out the importance of making having a smooth transition between the well-paid leave policies for parents to take care of the very young child and the entitlement that they can receive to access early childhood care and education services, because if there is a smooth transition and the linkages between these two different policy areas that are concerned with early childhood, we can see that there is much more facilitation in terms of responsibility sharing between mothers and fathers. There is an increase of gender equality at the workplace and also within the family, and also for the child to be well and to be flourishing at home and also in early childhood centers. So out of the 45 countries, there are 6 countries that have this very sort of ideal scenario of a smooth transition from the parental leave and the entitlement to accessing early childhood care and education. So these countries are Denmark, Finland, Malta, Norway, Slovenia, and Sweden. There are some other 7 countries that are apply sort of in terms of this category, but then because of this reality where the service provision has not been sort of kept pace at the level of the demand, in reality, at the operational level, this transition hasn't happened in these countries. But for the great majority of the 45 countries, there is no sort of smooth relationship between the 2 different policy areas. I'd like to turn to in issues of financing. There has been some sort of statements and consensus around what percentage of government funding should be dedicated to early childhood care and education. And I've seen some references to the importance of investing public resources for 1% of GDP at the minimum to ensure quality ECC for all. But then the reality is that there are very few countries which have achieved this benchmark, which is, for example, Sweden and Mongolia. The ones that are very close to is Bulgaria, Israel, Denmark, Chile, for example. But then if you look at, for example, the case of Egypt, the percentage is 0.14% to the GDP for pre-primary education, so it's very low. Jordan, it's 0.01% of the GDP. There needs to be more attention to increasing the public investment so that all the children, including the disadvantaged children, can be accessing early childhood care and education of quality. So I just like to turn to some information regarding the COVID pandemic. And of course, that have really, as other presenters were pointing out, really disrupted the social relationship and educational continuity, and facing unprecedented situations. So in terms of in understanding what's happening in different countries, UNESCO and World Bank and UNICEF have teamed up to develop surveys on national responses to be filled by ministries of education. They have just completed the 2nd round of the survey, but then I wanted to show you some results of from the first survey and the 2nd round of the survey. When we looked at the results of the first round of the survey, for example, there was information about what the pre-primary teachers have been using in terms of platforms to be used to provide for a pedagogical continuity during school closures. And for example, in Western Asia, where UAE is included, so we see that about the 35%, the highest percentage of the platform used was the online platform for pre-primary educators. And then the second frequent platforms used was TV, and then the mobile phone, and then the paper-based. This situation differs from differs for different regions. It's a pity that I cannot show it on the screen, but then of course this relates to, of course, the issues around the access to connectivity, data plan, the situation in the home, and so it's a complex situation altogether. But there have been some trends that emerged from the study. But then this first round of survey, which targeted 121, or which had responses from 121 countries, have shown consistently that for across all the different world regions, the pre-primary teachers were the least trained on using online platforms. So this is one of the issues that that would be taken up sort of at the policy discussion and also at the practice level. So perhaps I'd like to just refer to some of a couple of insights from another study, a survey that took place by the International Network on Leave Policies and Research Group, and that they have documented some policy sort of adjustments or responses in order to face the difficult situation. So, but then the survey found that it's not very necessary, or the countries don't find it necessary to sort of alter the policies about parental leave drastically. But some adjustments have been made by some countries for example, in Hungary and Latvia and Slovakia, they have decided to extend the period of giving the benefits if the people were reaching the end of the benefit terms, to be able to be able to facilitate their lives in this difficult time. Also, there have been specific measures targeted at parents, including giving free early childhood care and education services, giving allowances and one-off payments in several countries in Europe, and also many countries. Many countries that I would know of, they have also provided the full food packages or nutrition packages for families to be able to compensate for this the possible potential economic loss that are being experienced by families. So just a few words to conclude, and I really apologize for this technological glitch that happened. But then perhaps some of the things that I would like to highlight as a conclusion would be, as we are going through the COVID-19 impact, there are a lot of initiatives that require or that involve the rethinking of education, rethinking of early childhood education. What do we mean by early childhood education? Why do we want the early childhood education, and how do we want to have it in order to be able to face sort of the the challenges, and especially the challenges that we have been confronted with, which nobody really imagined in the past. So as part of the exercise, UNESCO has been sort of carrying out this reflection processes to rethink about education, including early childhood education and care. To reimagine and then really define what do we want in terms of humanity, and then also for the planet and for the living together. I think there has been lots of movement during the COVID for intersectoral coordination or cooperation, and I think that's something that we should value further on, and then to provide a much more holistic and systemic approach to early care and education. And finally, I'd like to end by saying that this lesson has learned us to really try to protect early childhood education and care, and also increase in this investment in this area, because it's really the start of the life, which really is a fundamental sort of period for learning and growth and well-being. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Yoshi. And even with the technical difficulties, it's clear that you have a keen understanding of the early childhood policy trends, and your responses were quite insightful, so thank you. Our final speakers for this afternoon are Dr. Tatiana Colleen and Ms. Afrodita Spahiu. I apologize if I pronounced that wrong. Dr. Tatiana is Chief of Early Childhood Development at the UNICEF Gulf Area Office, and she brings her 30 years of professional experience in a broad range of countries to this role. Ms. Afrodita Spahiu is a specialist in early childhood development at the UNICEF Regional Office for Middle East and North Africa. Specialist Spahiu is experienced in sector plan development, action plan development, and monitoring and evaluation in coordination with government counterparts and other relevant stakeholders. This presentation will focus on investing in early childhood development for a better future. Ladies, we look forward to your presentation. Please proceed.
Thank you very much. Can you see my screen, colleagues?
Yes, we can see it, but your voice is not clear. If you can just make the mic near to you. Okay.
Is this a little bit better?
Yes, it's better. Yeah.
Thank you very much, colleagues. I will just set up the stage a little bit for my colleague, who will then focus on exact examples from our region. Just to touch base and share that even though the evidence of importance of early experiences begins literally centuries ago, the focus and the argument and interest for higher investments in ECD intensified in the last 3 decades. From 1990s until today, that interest has materialized in a number of key milestone international documents that have influenced and shaped the government's work across the globe. One, of course, that I would emphasize is 1989 United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, which is the most ratified international convention, where the rights of children were delineated clearly, and where the view of the child as a passive recipient of experiences has changed to include it as an active participant. Just to point out that all countries in the Middle East and North Africa have signed and ratified the UN CRC, and they have engaged actively in their role of duty bearer to fulfill their duty toward young children's rights. Other major milestones shaping countries' policies, services, and approach to early childhood development are Lancet Child Development Series, of course, SDGs that have clearly identified the goals related to education, nurturing care framework that my colleague from UNESCO had mentioned, G20 initiative recognizing that investment in ECD should be a high priority as it gives all children the opportunity to achieve full realization of their rights and capabilities. In 2019, UNICEF's World Ready to Learn document draws attention to early years education and makes recommendations for countries. I just want to point out to all the participants and colleagues that the links to all these documents will be shared at the end of the presentation and in the paper that UNICEF prepared for this seminar. Oh, I cannot change to the next slide. Let me see.
1 second, let me just try.
Can you, yeah, sorry. I can stop sharing the screen, maybe change
No, just 1 second. It's okay.
And change to the next slide. The next slide is really...
it's not working, just maybe because it's from the spotlight. Just give me 1 second.
Okay. But the next slide really summarizes what we've been talking about throughout the day. Clearly, there is a large body of evidence that indicates that prenatal, perinatal, and postnatal experiences leave imprints on child's brain, causing lifelong effects on all aspects of person's life. Physical development, cognitive development, and social and emotional development. It affects creation of human emotional map, our deep-seated beliefs and values that are stored in the brain's system and that govern our lives in every aspect. Thank you. Within these dimensions are broad ranges of topics, including motor skills, executive functions, moral understanding, language acquisition, social change, personality, emotional development, self-concepts, and identity formation. And these, again, shape our beliefs, values, the way we process and behave toward the world around us. So it is clear from all the instruments that we just saw in the previous slide that ECD is seen as child's rights. Every child has the right to education, health, safety, protection, parental love, and the right to play. We have also seen from the previous presentations that there is a strong evidence arguing that the investments in early quality education yield great benefits in adult outcomes. The investing in early childhood development is, oops, sorry, are we, okay. I just wanted to, with this slide, just to quickly mention that investing in early childhood development is one of the best investments a country can make to boost economic growth, promote peaceful and sustainable societies, and eliminate extreme poverty and inequality. Equally important, investing in early childhood development is necessary to uphold the rights of every child. Global institutions have prioritized early childhood development in their programs of work. And as the previous speakers mentioned, in response to this urgent need to invest in early childhood development, WHO, UNICEF, and the World Bank, together with the partnerships for maternal, newborn, and child health, have developed the nurturing care framework that focuses on a life cycle and multi-sectoral approach to addressing early childhood development. Next slide, please. can we skip this one because we've seen it from the previous presenters. As you can see here, one of the major development of generating knowledge is the nurturing care framework. It conceptualizes a life cycle approach and emphasizes holistic and multi-sectoral addressing of early learning, health, nutrition, security and safety, responsive caregiving, and continuum of care. Can we have the next slide? I'm conscious of time to give. We have clearly became aware that integration of and coordination of health, education, nutrition, social protection, and other services had the potential to improve the lives of children and their caregivers around the world. But integration and coordination are absolutely the key, and we need to mainstream ECD components in national systems. The previous presenters have discussed how it influenced the policies in different countries, and I will yield now to my colleague Fertita to present some concrete examples from the countries in the region. Thank you.
Thank you, Tatiana. So I'm very glad to be here with you. I would like the organizer, as they are controlling the presentation, to move to the next slide, please.
Okay, is it this one?
10, it's slide 10. After this one, next one. Yeah, no, okay, somehow it's lost. No, you go back, please. Back. Okay, so it's not there, but you can keep the slide here.
Here is the slide 10.
Okay, so no, it's this one. Okay, so let's go back to the previous one.
This one?
Multisectorality, because this is where I want to talk to you about some few good examples about how multisectorality has worked, especially in the MENA region, in our region here in the Middle East and North Africa. So as we are stating that early childhood development foundation is actually to ensure multisectorality, and UNICEF regional office has in Amman that covers MENA region has recently conducted country case studies specifically on the early childhood development. And there are 4 countries that we have looked at good practices related to multisectoral programming and integrated early childhood development services. So there are 4 countries that we looked at, and we consider that there are good examples to be shared. We talk about Palestine, Oman, Egypt, and Tunisia. So in Palestine, just to give you an example, there has been a multi-sectoral early childhood development strategy, national strategy developed, and that this multi-sectoral partnership has specifically focused on improving early childhood, early detection and interventions of children with disabilities, and that within this area, a multi-sectoral team comprised of professionals from various sectors are working together to ensure that children are and their developmental delays are early detected and interventions are provided as early as possible. Oman is also another good example where a cross-sectoral system for coordination, collaboration and referral of child protection and also for children with disabilities has actually been designed in a way to guide various ministries to work together to improve children's outcomes. So this is an initiative that actually is influencing more and more coordinated approach which is being piloted in all governorates of Oman. In Egypt, similarly, we have seen where ministries of different sectors have come together. And for instance, they are linking beneficiaries to integrated packages, for instance, of social protection. And for instance, if they work for eradicting illiteracy of women, they also ensure that they are at the same time benefiting from social protection packages, at the same time encouraging that their children attend education and ensure and support their progress in school. Another good example is Tunisia, where Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health, Women, Family and Childhood, as well as civil society and private sector, they are close partners that work together in designing and scaling up programs that include capacity building and working together towards early childhood development throughout various sectors. Next slide, please. Yes, exactly. So where are we now? Globally, our colleague from UNESCO has also highlighted some aspects when it comes to the data information, whereas our focus in this slide is really to look at who are those that benefit the least, and from different sources, especially from Lancet series and the publication in 2017, we conclude that 200 million children in low and middle income countries are at risk of not reaching their full developmental potential, and mainly due to poverty, nutritional deficiencies, food insecurity, high crime communities, low quality resources, family stress, and child abuse and neglect. Next, please. Next slide. Yeah. If we look at the trends in our region, and when I say our region, for UNICEF, we usually talk about Middle East and North Africa countries. There are a number of areas where countries have made progress, and I would highlight one which is of importance for early childhood development, that is a reduction of child mortality rates from 65 per 1,000 live births, that was the case in 1990, to 21 today. And we think that this is a major achievement. Another aspect where we have seen progress in this region is that the poverty has decreased, but on the other hand, we're still talking about 29 million children who are still living in poverty. Another aspect which is characteristic of this region is that 3/4 of children in this region live in conflict-affected countries. And then 4 out of 5 children suffer from physical and psychological violence. The last but not least is that while we see positive trend in children accessing education, at the same time, we should not be very happy with the results, because we see that half of all children in this region who are in school don't reach the lowest benchmark on basic skills like in reading, writing, mathematics, and science. Next, please. Next slide. Next. I think you have shared the previous version of the presentation, but okay, we'll find a way.
This one what I have earlier in the email.
Yeah, I got this one. Okay, thank you. So if you can press, because the bars will go up now, please. Exactly. So using the country case studies that we have recently conducted, we are looking at some trends, and we are comparing where these specific countries and the children born today stand vis-a-vis the indicators and the benchmarks. For instance, if we look at the probability of reaching age 60, which is very much related to health aspect, is that, for instance, a child born today in Palestine has a chance of reaching age of 60, like 85% of children in Palestine have a chance to reach the age of 60. A child in Oman has 95% chance, in Tunisia 91%, and in Egypt, similarly like in Palestine, only 80% of children born today have a chance to reach the age of 60. Next. Next. Another indicator which is equally important is to look at the healthy growth, and specifically on stunting as one of the indicators of development. So again, a child born today in Palestine has a chance, 93% of children in Palestine have a chance to grow healthy. And next, please, because you will get other bars. Please, next. And 7% of them have a chance to be stunted. For Oman, we did not really get the data, but when we look at a child born today in Tunisia, so there is a 92% chance that that child will grow healthy. And next, because you get another level of bars, please, just press next. So 8% a child in Tunisia has a chance to be stunted, compared to a child in Egypt, which has a chance of 22% to be stunted. Next. Next. So if we look at the schooling, if you can press all the bars, please. Next, 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 so that we get the overview of the countries. So if we look at the expected years of schooling, for instance, in Palestine, the expected a child is expected to attend 12.2 years of education. And please, can you press, sorry, I don't know why it's not working. Is it working? Yes, please. Yes, yes, next, next, next. Press more. Press more, exactly, more. Yeah, that's it. No, back. Back, please. Okay, so if you look at the expected years of schooling, you can see the difference between the gray and the orange bars. So none of the children in any of these countries that we have studied actually has a chance to complete all the years of schooling expected. Okay, next. Next slide, please. Next. Okay, next. Next. This was supposed to be covered by my colleague. Okay, so now, if we focus specifically on preschool education and pre-primary and related to sustainable development goals and how early childhood is extremely important when looking through all these sustainable development goals, then if we draw your attention to the one specific for education, which is Sustainable Development 4, there is a very important target, that is by 2030, to ensure that all girls and boys have access to quality early childhood development, care, and pre-primary education, so that they are ready for primary education. So what we have actually, while looking at two indicators, next slide, I will give you just a visual presentation of globally where we are. So we say that because of poverty, the children living in poorest family have the least chance to benefit from pre-primary education, which means that the richest children are 7 times more likely to attend early childhood education programs compared to the ones who live in the poorest family. So what does that mean in terms of numbers? It means that 175 million children globally are not enrolled in pre-primary programs. 70% of children are behind in early learning. 420 million children will not learn basic skills by 2030. And we're talking about a shortage of teachers that is needed globally to meet this specific SDG, which is 9 million. Okay, next one. And my colleague from UNESCO talked about where do we stand in terms of pre-primary enrollment. But when we compare our region, we must admit that there is a, sorry?
Ms. Aphrodita, you have 3 minutes remaining.
Okay, yes, I have only a few slides left. So we will see that MENA is quite behind, and it's not even on the average of pre-primary, global pre-primary enrollment level. Next, please. So which are the global challenges that we have to think about and have to be addressed is improving early childhood teacher effectiveness, improving quality of learning environments in both formal and non-formal settings, increase expenditure on early childhood development, and enhance learning indicators and measurement of educational outcomes. Next. Next, please. This is about expenditure. I'm not going to talk about that because our colleague from UNESCO has covered quite substantially. And the next one, please. Yeah, so my last message would be this. Like we at UNICEF, we are suggesting 5 measures for a national success. The first one is to have effective budgeted policies to support multi-sectoral interventions, to invest on capacity development of frontline workers, including on parenting, to ensure national data and evidence platforms in order to inform quality programming, sustainable financing, as well as advocacy and communication to empower parents and build partnership. And my last message would be that what we are encouraging governments to do is to ensure to provide at least 10% of education national budgets for early childhood education. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, ladies, for concluding our presentation today on the vital importance of early childhood care and education. In the remaining few minutes, we'll try to address a few questions. I will need the assistance of my colleague here. But as we're waiting for that, how about we skip to the part where each of the presenters gives a quick 30-second summation of the takeaways you'd like for attendees to have. Can we please start with Dr. Hessa?
نعم، شكرا. في أشياء مهمة عند التركيز على قطاع الطفولة المبكرة، أهمها actually هو تركيز القيادة على هذا القطاع، وفي الدول، في جميع الدول وجميع يعني المؤسسات. النظر إلى التركيز وايد أدى أن نحن حددنا فئة عمرية، وبعدها ركزنا كيف ممكن نفيدها في جميع القطاعات المختلفة، وبالتعاون مع الجميع، مع جميع القطاعات. ما نقدر نقول أن الطفل فشل في التعليم مثل ما نشوف أحياناً من الوالدين في السوشيال ميديا وغيرها، لأن التعليم مش المدخل الوحيد لإدراك الطفل. لازم ننظر في جميع الأمور اللي تمر أو يتعرض لها الطفل من خلال الميديا، من خلال رعايته الصحية، البيئة اللي موجودة في البيت، حماية الطفل وما يتعرض له. هذا بعد ينطبق على المشاريع اللي نقوم فيها. ما ينفع نقول أن نحن الإديوكيشن بننظر له بطريقة منفصلة عن باقي البرامج. برامج حماية الطفل مهمة في دعم التعليم، برامج الصحة مهمة في دعم التعليم، برامج الدعم الأسري مهمة، برامج المحاكم، برامج الوعي الزوجين مهمة. البيئة اللي محيطة بالطفل أكثر من التعليم، وما نقدر نقيس شيء ونخلي الباقي. يجب النظر مثل ما قالوا اللي قبلي، البيانات مهمة، ربط البيانات مهم، تعاون الشركاء الرئيسيين وايد مهم في أن نوجد هذه البيئة اللي تشجع نمو الطفل في بيئة آمنة، قادر على التعليم وقادر على الاطلاع وعنده الفضول أنه يكبر ويرد بالخير لمجتمعه. فهو أهم شيء عندنا نفس ما قلت الترابط والتكامل بالجهود المبذولة في جميع القطاعات المختلفة.
Thank you, Dr. Hassa. Dr. Yoshi.
Thank you very much for this question. So I would say that, well, in addition to what I have said, and perhaps I would like to emphasize really the importance of paying attention to early childhood, which has been lacking in many of the discussions and debates around education responses to COVID-19, as UNESCO works in the field of education and works with the Ministry of Education as sort of the main entry point for government cooperation and collaboration. In the discussions, we hear much less about early years, how they have been tackling this important area vis-a-vis primary education, secondary education. Of course, in many of the lower income countries, the situation is very challenging, as they have been sort of embedded in or gone through different kinds of crises, including insecurity crisis, food security crisis, conflicts. So we should be mindful of all these challenges that have already been there, and that the COVID situation has aggravated the situation for families and communities. So it's not easy to say just by saying, okay, early childhood is important, please include it. But I think we have to still keep saying this nevertheless, because this is really where we really start building an inclusive and respectful societies for all. Another thing I wanted to say was about really taking seriously the equity issues and inclusion issues regarding early childhood as a right for everybody, to the right of good health, the right to good nutrition, the right to protection and education, which are all interlinked with the ability and the well-being level of the children who we would like to really support in our efforts. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Yoshi. Dr. Tatiana.
Thank you very much. I just want to point out that many of us speak many languages, but in each of our languages there is a saying that how you plant, this is what you will sow. I would like to emphasize that the investment in children at the earliest age is something that yields returns when they become grown-ups. I would also like to point out that the COVID situation and everything that had happened in 2020 presents also a great opportunity, especially for some countries in our region who are in position to invest more and to do so holistically, looking at the whole child. And I would call on all of us to think and have a vision for the future that will include the changing environment and the fact that our children born today will live in a very different world 20, 50 years from now. And if we want to invest in them, we should keep that in mind. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Tatiana. And finally, Specialist Aphrodita.
Yeah, not to repeat what the previous speakers mentioned from my side, I would have two key messages. COVID, unfortunately, has shown that there have been shifts of priorities in terms of the response, that early childhood development was not really the priority in the list of partners, governments, and other stakeholders in ensuring especially continuation of education, learning, and support. That's why I think that while this has happened, we should really urge all partners to keep in mind that they should sustain, they should keep, and they should scale up the initiatives and programs to support early childhood development. And the last but not least, I think that COVID has also reminded us one thing, that parents have served during the COVID times, not only as those who take care of kids, but also as frontline workers, because we have seen them as important players to support early childhood development. Therefore, invest on parenting, because that's the most important aspect of early childhood development. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Specialist Aphrodita. I will now yield to Ms. Mahra. Thank you all.
Thank you, Asia, for running this session. And thank you for each of our presenter in the first session and the second session. Thanks for their message. Thanks for their sharing of experience. Thanks for the organization that was our partner in this, World Bank, UNICEF, UNESCO, هيئة أبو ظبي للطفولة المبكرة. أشكر جميع الحضور اللي استمروا معنا حتى الآن، ونعتذر لهم لتأخير الوقت، لكن الخبرات كانت ثرية وكانت تحتاج وقت أكثر للمشاركة. طبعا ونوعدكم بالكثير. يقولنا نحن محتاجين مثل هذه الندوات بإذن الله. المركز الإقليمي للتخطيط التربوي سوف يستمر في هذه المنصة، منصة الندوات التربوية، من أجل نشر المعرفة التربوية نحو السياسات وتطوير السياسات التربوية. وراح نكون إن شاء الله بإذن الله المنصة التي تجمع الخبراء لكي يستفيد منها الجميع. ونحن هنا نتشرف بجميع المشاركين من الدول العربية. هذه الندوات كانت قبل كوفيد تقام على مستوى وطني فقط، مستوى دولة الإمارات، لكن مع الظروف تم تحويلها إلى ندوات ومنصة إلكترونية للتشارك الخبرات والمعارف. والحمد لله الآن يستفيد منها تقريبا ما يقارب أكثر عن 600 شخص، سواء على زوم أو قناة اليوتيوب للمركز على مستوى الوطن العربي وأيضا العالم. فنتشرف بهم ونقول لهم أن هذه المنصة سوف تستمر لخدمتهم بإذن الله. ونشكر أيضا في الأخير المحاضرين والخبراء لمشاركتهم معارفهم وخبراتهم معنا. شكرا جميعا.